All right. Well, welcome to part 6. Now that we have a lot of scripture and history under us with a foundation, we can put the final piece of this puzzle together, which of course is the United States. I want to spend a lot of time to document how the United States was taken over by the Jesuits to basically become the false prophet in fulfillment of Revelation 13. Now, this is important because of several reasons. The Bible warns of a lamb-like power that arises to basically help the beast accomplish its purpose of resurrection. This power looks Christian, but actually works and acts by the power of Satan. It wields all the power of the first beast, meaning it's a world power, unchallenged. It creates a government that represents the government that existed in the 1260 period of the beast, where it ruled with an iron fist. And of course, it deceives the world through many false signs and wonders into building this system so that the entire world can adopt it and the kings of the earth can pledge their power to the beast. Now, it's very important to understand that the image of the beast is the one that enforces the mark. It's the image of the beast, not the false prophet. So there's some important distinction here. The United States is the false prophet. It is a power that meets all of the criteria in Revelation 13. Of the second beast. And of course, we talk about that quite a bit in my End Time series. And the purpose of this section is not to identify the United States as the false prophet. I'm going to assume that you already know. And if you don't know, if you've never heard that before, then I really encourage you to go watch my End Time series. I believe episodes 18 and 19 are the ones dealing with the false prophet and the image of the beast. Also, I have Venerable Day of the Sun, number 5. In that list, talks about a lamb-like power. We have quite a bit there as well. We're going to be documenting things that will be obvious today. But nevertheless, the point is, if you've never heard that before, this is not going to be documenting prophetically how the United States fulfills the false prophet role. I have plenty of material on that. What I want to look at is how the United States was subjugated by the Jesuits so that you can see the Synagogue of Satan in the same place that you saw in Russia, in China, and everywhere else, in various ways. So anyway, the point is that the image of the beast is what ends up enforcing the mark of the beast. Now that's important because the image is created by the people. Of course, it doesn't specify, does the world create it all at once? It's very logical and likely to think that the image will be first completed in the United States. The false prophet deceives people into building the image. People, in parentheses, might be, originally people here in the United States, and then obviously everybody else will adopt it. And certainly we'll look at that in the current events section. But nevertheless, it's the false prophet that deceives the world into creating this government system. It doesn't matter if it happens in the United States first or if it happens all across the world relatively simultaneously. It doesn't matter. I believe it will happen in the United States first through people like Trump and nationalism and MAGA, and that's going to be very quickly exported to the rest of the world. Nevertheless, what matters is it's the image that enforces the mark of the beast. So that means that we're not there yet. We're not at the image being completed yet. We're close. I believe we're close, and we're going to see a lot of things in current events about that. But nevertheless, it's the image, and the false prophet, through its many false signs and wonders, works these signs to basically convince people to build this image. So a couple of false signs and wonders that come out of the United States, just as examples to you. Again, if you've never heard this before, if you have, then it's a good review. But NASA, Hollywood, televangelism, the charismatic movement, the NAR movement, dispensationalism, Christian Zionism, word of faith, prosperity, New Thought, New Age movements, Jesus revolutions, Messianic Judaism, the climate change movement, the internet, social media, all these various technologies, more and more and more stuff we could probably list for dozens and dozens of items. But these are some examples of various false signs and wonders that have come into the world through the United States. All of these things have an agenda. And of course, we've looked at all of them. All the things I just listed off for you, I have looked at all of them in my various series. In my heliocentric conspiracy series, we looked at a very detailed look at, NASA and all of the, heliocentric stuff that's happened in the last, especially 200 years. How that serves the world marveling after the beast. It's truly profound. Through the climate change movement, through the idea of, a globe and uniting the world and things like that, and space and aliens and asteroids and all that stuff. We looked at the charismatic movement in the Great Delusion series, the NAR movement, how that's serving the beast, dispensationalism. I've looked at, the Messianic Judaism, all sorts of things, Jesus revolutions. All of these things will serve the ends of the beast. It's truly profound, folks. All roads lead to Rome. And if you've studied any of these things, you understand that they ultimately will serve the agencies of the beast to create this echo chamber, this massive worldwide echo chamber where everyone is of one mind, and that is to take the mark of the beast and to be in this system. It's truly profound because, again, the coming of this system, the coming of the lawless one, is by all power and activity of Satan. All of his power is focused on this outcome. And that should be something to really wake you up. That the coming delusion is not going to be obvious. Unless you have the Holy Spirit, you will see it. But for most people, it's not going to be obvious. And that's the point. When people think that, we conquered the deep state, we did this. What do you mean? You conquered the obvious enemy? That's by design. So that the less obvious one, the subtle attack from the inside, can come and rescue you and be the savior. So we know that all of these things I just listed off, all these deceptions, are connected to the forbidden fruit and the mystery religion, one way or another. But they have been done through the United States in fulfillment of the prophecy that there is a power that will work false signs and wonders in the presence of the beast, so there's a relationship there between the two. It's as if the beast is sitting there on its throne and the false prophet is in its court, working false signs and wonders. And you will see why there's that relationship. Because the United States was subjugated by the Jesuits very, very early on. Again, if you want more info, episode 18 and 19 in my End Time series, Venerable Day of the Sun, number 5, both of those will be very edifying for you. In this section, my interest is more to connect the subjugation of the United States to all of the things that we have been looking at previously. We want to prove that the Bible is true, and that means we can understand the trajectory of history and current events. So, couple of important things to review. America originally was colonies of pilgrims. But the pilgrims were harlot daughters of Rome. As much as people want to paint them as these noble Protestants, the reality is, folks, that pilgrims, like all Protestantism, is harlotry. Now, there are very good things that the Protestant Revolution and Reformation created. However, from the very beginning they lost. Because, as you saw previously, they kept on to the traditions of their mother. Today, Protestantism is just sacramental, Catholic system without the sacramental system. Catholicism without sacraments. That's what Protestantism is today. Practically, I should say, not nearly every aspect of doctrine has been Catholicized. From Sunday sacredness to the immortality of the soul, heliocentrism, etc., etc. Soteriology, we're saved by free will, not by God's predetermined plan for his glory, so on and so forth. So people believe Catholic teachings, whether they believe that they're Catholic or not. And this is another clue that you're at the end, because the Protestant Reformation is practically conquered. Either way, the pilgrims were harlots. Now, how does that work? Well, although they were fleeing persecution, and again, I document this quite a bit in all my videos that I mentioned to you, especially like in the, this one I did not mention, but the Sabbath series number 8, where we look at the history of Sunday laws throughout the last 2,000 years and going into the present moment. I document there in Sabbath number 8, the way that the pilgrims would behave with people that didn't obey or go along with their belief systems. And you can see spiritually that there is harlotry there. The pilgrims, though they were protesting and trying to run away from Rome, they were doing the same things that Rome was doing to the people around them. Just like how the English, how they were protesting Catholicism, and then basically all the kings and queens wanted to be their own popes of their own country. So look, the flesh is desperately wicked, folks. And this is how the devil gets you. If he can't get you with one, he'll get you with another. So the pilgrims, they had their own blue laws that basically you couldn't buy or sell if you didn't go to church on Sunday, just like the Roman Catholic Church did in the Dark Ages. They even whipped people, and sometimes even they basically threatened you with death. That if you did something, 3 times in a row or something, or sinned with a high hand, you would be basically put to death. They had moral policing. You can't do this after a certain hour, curfews. So pilgrim Protestants from the very beginning looked like a lamb, but they spoke, meaning they legislated and they acted like the dragon. So from the very beginning, America was a spiritual harlot of Mystery Babylon, and that's very well documented. Now, within 100 years of the Pilgrims in the 1700s, you had basically the Founding Fathers. And if you look at them, you see the Synagogue of Satan. George Washington, Freemason, probably also a closet Catholic, maybe. Thomas Jefferson, he denied the deity of Christ. He ripped pages out of the Bible, tried to make his own New Testament, was a deist. Ben Franklin, Freemason Grand Master until his death. James Madison, Memorial and Remonstrance, confuses Christianity with Catholicism, says, what's been the use of Christianity? And all this time it hasn't done anything. Of course, he's confusing it with Catholicism. John Adams, Treaty of Tripoli, he signed that basically America was not founded in any sense on the Christian religion. Joseph Priestley, very influential figure, especially for Thomas Jefferson. He denied the deity of Christ. He denied the Trinity. He was a deist, subordinationist. He had his own ideas about stuff. So do all these people paraded around either as Christians or as very, God-believing people, noble people. But really they were the synagogue of Satan. Do you understand? They're duplicitous. People say, oh, this country was founded as a Christian country. No, it was not. It was never a Christian country. The Pilgrims putting people to death for not going to church on Sunday or threatening people to be put to death is not Christian whatsoever. It looks like a lamb but speaks like a dragon. So, 100 years after the Founding Fathers, now we go to the Civil War era, America had become fully subjugated by the Jesuits. So today we're going to document this process, especially the last 100 years I just mentioned, from the Founding Fathers to the Civil War, because this was America's destiny, folks. America's destiny by being a harlot daughter of Mystery Babylon, because Satan gave his throne and power and great authority to the papal institution. All of the harlots will be subjugated. That is Satan's throne. It's not America. It's not Israel. It's not everywhere else. It's Rome. Therefore, all of the harlot daughters must fall in line one way or another. The Freemasons who started America hated the Jesuits. And we'll see some quotes from them today. They knew the evils of the Jesuits, but they too themselves were evil. Do you get it? It's just different heads of the Hydra fighting with each other. And Satan had to give his power to one of the heads, so everybody else has got to bow down and fall in line. That takes time. And this is exactly what we're going to document with the United States. The point being is this, is that at no point in America's history was it not linked to the beast somehow. And you'll see more evidence of that as well, from all of the architecture in the beginning and the various things that were happening to set the country up. It's important to realize, though, at no point in the beginning was America ever divorced from the beast. Both spiritually, politically, economically, there's always some connection there, some way, somehow. So, therefore, the Bible is true, that America is the lamb-like power that rises, that works by the power of Satan to basically work in the presence of the beast and ultimately bring people back to the beast. Now let's look at early American history. I'm not going to count Pilgrims here again. We're just doing the years from basically the founding of the country to the Founding Fathers all the way through the Civil War, because there's a lot to talk about even just with that. I'm not counting the Pilgrims because, again, there's plenty that I've documented on them. You can look into them yourself, but if you want more info, just go to Sabbath series and number 8 in that series, where we look at history of Sunday laws. I want to review here more the history from the Founding Fathers and get an early context of what they said, what they felt, what some of the early presidents went through, like Adams and Jefferson and Monroe. And we'll also see some other things with the Civil War as well. So, without further ado, let's go to this first thing, which is by Samuel Adams, The Rights of the Colonists. I believe, let's see here, we just scroll down. I think this is on page 400 something, but anyway, it says, in regard to religion, mutual toleration, the different professions thereof, is what all good and candid minds in all ages have ever practiced, and both by precept and example, inculcated on mankind. It is now generally agreed among Christians that this spirit of toleration, in the fullest extent consistent with the being of civil society, is the chief characteristic mark of the Church. Insomuch that Mr. Locke has asserted and proved, beyond the possibility of contradiction on any solid ground, that such toleration ought to be extended to all whose doctrines are not subversive of society. The only sects which thinks ought to be, and which by all wise laws are excluded from such toleration, are those who teach doctrines subversive of the civil government under which they live. Who are those, I wonder? The Roman Catholics or the Papists are excluded by reasons of such doctrines as these, that princes excommunicated may be deposed, and those that they call heretics may be destroyed without mercy. Does that confirm the Inquisition? Besides, they're recognizing the Pope in so absolute a manner in subversion of government by introducing as far as possible into the states under whose protection they enjoy life, liberty, and property, and solecism in politics, imperium and imperio, leading directly to the worst anarchy and confusion, civil discord, war, and bloodshed. In other words, because this is kind of older English, we should have religious tolerance for anybody who basically isn't going by their precepts going to subvert the government. In other words, people who are believing, relatively harmless things and do not have a creed that they swear allegiance to that is by default subversive to the government, we can have religious tolerance to those people. The people who are excluded from this particular dogma are the Roman Catholics and the Papists. Why? Because they acknowledge the Pope as their sovereign God King above all else, and therefore that is an inherent conflict with any sovereign state. You have to understand that, folks. Catholicism, at its highest level, people who are frothing at the mouth Catholics are in complete conflict with what the founding fathers of this country, to the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, stood for. I'm not defending the founding fathers. I am not saying they were good people. But again, there's a conflict there, and that conflict needed to be subjugated because America was destined to be the false prophet. But this tells you very early on what the people believed about Catholics and Catholicism. Again, this is not about Catholic people today. This is about Catholicism and militant Catholics and Jesuit spies and people who are part of secret orders. This is what it's about. It's not about the average Catholic who, just basically goes to church on Sunday. So this is from John Adams, early in the 1800s. This is a letter from John Adams to Thomas Jefferson, May 16th. Was it? Yeah. 6 May 1816. It's the date. Let's see. I do not like the late resurrection of the Jesuits. They have a general now in Russia and corresponds with the Jesuits in the U.S., who are more numerous than everybody knows. Shall we not have swarms of them here? As many shapes and disguises as ever a king of the gypsies, Bamfield Moore Carew himself assumed. In the shape of printers, editors, writers, schoolmasters, and so on. I have lately read Pascal's letters over again and 4 volumes of the history of the Jesuits. If ever any congregation of men could merit eternal perdition on earth and in hell, according to these historians, though like Pascal true Catholics, it is this company of Loyola. Our system, however, of religious liberty must afford them an asylum. But if they do not put purity of our elections to a severe trial, it will be a wonder. Do you understand what Adams is lamenting here to Jefferson? He's saying, look, I've read about these guys, which also confirms to you all the things we've been reading. He's read volumes and volumes about these people. That means that by the 1800s, they've been doing a lot of things worth volumes of description by historians. And it seems like the historian that wrote about them was a Catholic. So that's interesting. But what Adams is lamenting to you here is that he realizes they are really in a rock and a hard place. Because the whole point of America is religious tolerance, freedom for all, this sort of open borders type of situation. And he realizes that the Jesuits are going to take advantage of that and come in as writers, printers, editors, schoolmasters, i.e. art of war. You need to be a Protestant? Well, be a Protestant. You need to be a school teacher? Be a school teacher. And they will infiltrate America and they will take advantage of our doctrines to basically subvert the government. That's what Adams is lamenting to Jefferson here. This is from Thomas Jefferson to Adams later that year, August 1st, 1816. Let's see what he wrote. He wrote, I know nothing of the history of the Jesuits you mention in 4 volumes. Is it a good one? I dislike with you their restoration because it marks a retrograde step from light towards darkness. So he knew something about them. We shall have our follies without doubt. Someone or more of them will always be afloat. But ours will be the follies of enthusiasm, not of bigotry, not of Jesuitism. So they knew what Jesuitism was. Jesuitism was a thing. Obviously, if this is just a group of harmless priests, then these quotes would make no sense. They really wouldn't. So, did Thomas Jefferson and Adams know about the Jesuits? Yes, they did. James Monroe with the Monroe Doctrine, also an important point. This is, Monroe was earlier in the 1800s, like 1823. This is Spotlight, a primary source by James Monroe. President James Monroe's doctrine annual message to Congress included a warning to European powers not to interfere in the affairs of the Western Hemisphere. Boy, did the Jesuits like that one. This portion of the address is known as the Monroe Doctrine. Secretary of State John Quincy Adams opposed a joint declaration. He convinced President Monroe to make a unilateral declaration of American policy, known as the Monroe Doctrine. Monroe announced that the Western Hemisphere was henceforth closed to further European colonization or puppet monarchs. Oh boy. He also said that the United States would not interfere in internal European affairs. You leave us alone, we'll leave you alone. For much of the 19th century, the United States lacked the military strength to prevent European intervention in the New World. But since European meddling threatened British as well as American interests, the Monroe Doctrine was enforced by the Royal Navy. Nevertheless, for the American people, the Monroe Doctrine was the proud symbol of American hegemony in the Western Hemisphere. Yeah, right, Satan's not going to let you do that for too long. Unilaterally, the United States has defined its rights and interests in the world. So this was the United States throwing its gauntlet down and saying, we are not your puppets. 1823. Now, how do you think the Jesuits responded to that, I wonder? Fun fact is that both Adams and Jefferson were basically in opposition to the Jesuits, and they both died on the same day, July 4th, 1826. Of course, by poison, but you're not going to get that in mainstream sources. Monroe died July 4th, also 5 years later in 1831. All of them were poisoned with arsenic. So, of course, they were poisoned on July 4th as a statement to tell all who knew what was actually happening who's actually in charge. July 4th being obviously the independence of America. So this is a sign of showing you who you're really dependent on. Now let's talk about the 1800s to the Civil War. I want to talk about some important presidents leading up to the Civil War, which of course was the inflection point. That's what I want you to get out of today, is that the Civil War was the inflection point where America became subjugated to the papal power. And that's a very important point to understand current events and American history and all of these people that say America was a Christian country and America this, America that. America has been a papal power since 1865 at the very minimum. A lot of these things are taken from a book called Secret Terrorists by Bill Hughes. We've mentioned that one before. Certainly you can look into it yourself. It's got some good history there. So the first one I want to start with is Andrew Jackson. This is from Chapter 2, President Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson was elected to the presidency in the year 1828. His bravery and military skill in defeating the British in the War of 1812 are well known. He fought many battles in open combat, but now he was facing an entirely different enemy. This enemy claimed to be the American, just like him, claimed to want the best for America and just like him, and occupied high positions of responsibility just like him. The Jesuits were going to destroy America as determined by the sinister councils of Vienna, Verona, and Chieri. And it was during the presidency of Andrew Jackson that they began to apply their treachery in full force. Really quick pause. These three councils happened immediately after the Jesuits were reinstated in 1814. There were some European councils, and basically these councils were the elite meeting and figuring out how can we get rid of this country and subjugate it. So pay attention to that. These Jesuits moved among the American people and looked just like Americans. They were in fact American citizens, but their loyalty was to the Pope, Synagogue of Satan. Their purposes were those of the papacy. These people were traitors and a serious threat to the continued existence of the United States. Two of these traitors were John C. Calhoun and Nicholas Biddle. Andrew Jackson won the presidency in 1828 by a very wide margin. His vice president was John C. Calhoun of South Carolina. Calhoun realized that the love for freedom was very strong in the hearts of all Americans. He realized that slavery was rapidly being hemmed in because nearly all of the territories purchased from Spain and France were made free. Without a continual expansion of slavery, it would eventually be defeated. In order to derail the current anti-slavery trends in America, Calhoun began a newspaper in Washington called the United States Telegraph. In this paper, he began to advocate the idea called states' rights. The doctrine of states' rights would lead inevitably to the complete abolishment of the United States. It presumed that a state had an inherent right to do whatever it wanted. Under the principles of states' rights, If a state wanted to secede from the Union, it could do so. This could eventually eliminate the United States. So when you see, really quick pause again, when you see things like Texas wanting to secede from the Union and California wanting to be their own state, all of these things go way back. How do you destroy a country that is based on the idea of, okay, there's a cooperating union of states, but there's a balance. You are your own little city-state, area, your own state, but you're in the union. There's a sense of cooperation and interdependence. It's not just everybody for themselves and do what you want, like the European countries. See the problem? This is exactly what the states' rights agenda was intended for. Because the Jesuits knew that, okay, if we could divide these states and create conflict between them, then we basically can take over the country. That was the point, and that culminated in the Civil War. Moving on. Calhoun took a festering sore and turned it into the reason for the southern states to secede from the Union. The festering sore was the high tariff placed on foreign imports, which made European goods more expensive. Since Europe bought large amounts of southern cotton and other commodities, the tariff meant that the southern merchants made less money for their exports. This tax helps northern manufacturers because now the southern merchant would buy more from him. Calhoun convinced the United States that they were getting a very bad deal and that they had the right to leave the Union over this issue. This is from John Smith Dye, The Adder's Den, page 22. The South, being an agricultural region, was easily convinced that a high tariff on foreign imports was injurious to them. He next undertook to explain to the South that these high duties were placed on specific articles and was done as a special favor to protect local interests. Thus, he said to the people of the South, "You're being taxed to support the northern manufacturers." And it was on this popular issue he planted his nullification flag. This new bastard democracy meant that the right to destroy peaceably by force when ready the federal union. Shortly after Calhoun started his paper, there was a meeting called to honor the memory of Thomas Jefferson. At this meeting, Andrew Jackson was asked to speak. He arose and declared, "Our federal union, it must be preserved." After saying this, Jackson sat down. Calhoun then arose and declared the following: "The union next to our liberties most dear, may we all remember that it can only be preserved by respecting the rights of the states and distributing equally the benefits and burdens of the union." Calhoun put the union second to our liberties. The union and the Constitution are what established our liberties. If the union were dissolved, the states would be at each other's throats, just like the countries of Europe down through history. Exactly. The resources of the states would be constantly used up, always preparing for war with each other. This was the objective of Calhoun and the papacy from the very beginning. Their goal was to destroy the United States. Calhoun used the tariff to create friction between the North and the South. Congress could have easily changed the tariff, so there was no reason for secession. Many spoke out against his underhanded methods. Daniel Webster said the following: "Sir, the world would scarcely believe that this whole controversy and all the desperate means which its support requires has no other foundation than a difference of opinion between a majority of the people of the South Carolina on one side and a vast majority of the people of the United States on the other. The world will not credit the fact. We who hear and see it can ourselves hardly yet believe it." Daniel Webster knew that the issue went far deeper than a tariff. Calhoun was the Jesuit plant being used to split America in two. John Quincy Adams in the House of Representatives declared the following: "In opposition to the compromise of Mr. Clay, no victim is necessary, and yet you propose to bind us hand and foot, to pour out blood upon the altar to appease the unnatural discontent of the South, a discontent having deeper root than the tariff, and will continue when that is forgotten." Adams was correct in his observation. The tariff issue died, but the smoldering embers of division had split America in half. The blood of the Civil War can be traced back to the Jesuit John C. Calhoun. As we watch Calhoun seek to rend America in two, let us remember the words of ex-Catholic priest Charles Chiniquy. Quote, "Rome saw at once that the very existence of the United States was a formidable menace to her own life. From the very beginning, she perfidiously sowed the germs of division and hatred between the two great sections of this country, and succeeded in dividing the South from the North on the burning question of slavery. That division was her golden opportunity to crush one by the other, and reign over the bloody ruins of both. A favored, long-standing policy." That's from Charles Chiniquy, 50 Years in the Church of Rome. Also another famous figure in this portion of history. You'll learn more about him as we go along. Calhoun was not a loyal citizen of the United States. He worked to advance the Pope's agenda. He seemed to be an American, but was really a Jesuit in the Pope's army, in the effort to destroy America. Synagogue of Satan. Priest Felon makes this following statement. Why, if the government of the United States were at war with the church, would we say tomorrow, to hell with the government of the United States? And if the church and all the governments of the world were at war, we would say, to hell with all of the governments of the world. Why is it the Pope has such tremendous power? Why the Pope is the ruler of the world? All the emperors, all the kings, all the princes, all the presidents of the world are as these altar boys of mine. Priest Felon, Western Watchman, 1912. John C. Calhoun was one of the papal altar boys, doing as he was told. Andrew Jackson, in his message to Congress in 1832, stated the following. The right of the people of a single state to absolve themselves at will and without the consent of the other states from their most solemn obligations and hazard the liberties and happiness of millions compromising this nation cannot be acknowledged. In other words, this whole states' rights thing, this extreme thing where basically every state is sovereign and it can do whatever they want, that's not going to be acknowledged. There's a balance. There's a balance. You have a union. This is a little quick break here. This is how, again, the Bible tells you not to go to the left or to the right. What the original American idea was good. It was a very unique form of government. This idea of a union that was neither too much right or too much left, in the sense it was neither city-states warring against each other like Europe, nor was it the federal government, which we have now, which of course was after the Civil War, where you have this same thing that it was before. It's a monarchy, and of course with a monarch puppet. So it was neither here nor there. It was a balance between these two extremes, a union where everybody had their own thing going on, but they weren't so independent of each other that they could just secede and start fighting with each other, because that was going to affect everybody else's liberties. The whole point of the Union was to give everybody a freedom in America. So Andrew Jackson is saying, look, we can't go that far in this direction because that's going to threaten what we have as a country. Moving on with the quote. Such authority is believed to be wholly repugnant both to the principles upon which general government is constituted and the objects which it is formed to obtain. John Smith Dye, The Adder's Den. Jackson knew that Calhoun's plot was devised to destroy the United States and its constitutional liberties, and this was unacceptable to him. Jackson was standing in the way of the Congress of Vienna, Verona, and Chieri, and the Jesuits had to deal with him. Nicholas Biddle, another one of their agents, carried out phase 2 of the Jesuit attack. Biddle was a brilliant financier, having graduated from the University of Pennsylvania at the age of 13. He was a master of the science of money. By the time Jackson came to the presidency in 1828, Biddle was in full control of the federal government's central bank. Pay attention to this, because just like we get to Jacob Schiff later, 80 years later from this, trying again to get control of the central bank after the Civil War, which of course they were successful with the Federal Reserve, they've been trying at this from very early on to put America into the central banking system. Of course, at first they failed. So anyway, this was not the first time that a central bank had been established. Twice before, first under Robert Morris and then under Alexander Hamilton, had a central bank been tried, but in both cases it had failed because of fraudulent actions on the part of the bankers who were in control. After the War of 1812, a central bank was tried again, and it was this third attempt that we find Mr. Biddle. Who was behind Nicholas Biddle and the attempt to have a central bank in the United States? The blunt reality is that Rothschild banking dynasty in Europe was the dominant force, both financially and politically, in the formation of the Bank of the United States. That's from Edward Griffin, The Creature from Jekyll Isle. Over the years, since Rothschild, the Manchester textile furniture manufacturer, had bought cotton from the southern states, the Rothschild had developed heavy American commitments. Nathan had made loans to various states of the Union and had been for a time the official European banker of the U.S. government and was a pledged supporter of the Bank of the United States. Of course he was. Derek Wilson, Rothschild, The Wealth and Power of a Dynasty. Here's another one. The Rothschilds long had a powerful influence in dictating American financial laws. The law records show that they were the power in the old Bank of the United States. Gustavus Meyer's History of the American Fortunes Random House. So the Rothschilds were very neck deep with all of these intrigues and banking systems. But remember, who are the Rothschilds? Rothschild, Red Shield, guardians of the papal treasure. So you have to remember that. The instigators behind Biddle and his efforts to establish the central bank were the Rothschilds. For whom was the Rothschild family working? Quote, aware that the Rothschilds are an important Jewish family, I looked them up in the Encyclopedia Judaica and discovered that they bear the title guardians of the Vatican treasury. The appointment of Rothschild gave the Black Papacy absolute financial privacy and secrecy. Who would ever search a family of Orthodox Jews for the key to the wealth of the Roman Catholic Church? That's Tupper Saucy, Rulers of Evil, page 160. The Rothschilds were Jesuits who used their Jewish background as a facade to cover their sinister activities. The Jesuits, working through Rothschild and Biddle, sought to gain control of the banking system of the United States. Andrew Jackson was not happy with the central bank. When Biddle sought to renew the bank's charter in 1832, President Jackson put his re-election bid on the line and vetoed Congress's attempt to renew the charter. He vetoed it for 3 reasons. The bank was becoming a monopoly, it was unconstitutional, and it gave a grave danger to the country by having the bank heavily dominated by foreign interests, i.e. the Jesuits. Jackson felt that the very security of America was in danger from these foreign interests. He said the following: "Is there no danger to our liberty and independence in a bank that is, in its nature, has so little to bind it to our country? Is there not cause to tremble for the purity of our elections in peace and for the independence of our country in war? Controlling our currency, receiving our public monies, and holding thousands of our citizens in independence as independent, it would be more formidable and dangerous than a naval and military power of the enemy." Herman E. Cross, Documentary History of Banking and Currency in the United States. So Jackson was well aware of what the issues with the central bank were and what they were trying to do. Because, remember, one of, was it Nathan? I think it was Nathan Rothschild that said, "Yeah, I don't care who controls the country, just give me control of the money supply and I'm good." Jackson's comments were nothing new. Others understood the power wielded by those who ran the bank. Meyer Rothschild said, I think this is the quote I was telling. It was Meyer Rothschild. "Let me issue and control a nation's money, and I care not who writes the laws." Edward Griffin, The Creature from Jekyll Isle. That's right. Who cares who writes the laws if you control the money and you're the one printing it? This is the Jesuits' Rothschild's golden rule. The one who has the gold makes the rules. Griffin then writes, "The Rothschild dynasty had conquered the world more thoroughly, more cunningly, and much more lastingly than all of the Caesars before or all the Hitlers after them." Thomas Jefferson has this to say about the central bank. Quote, "A private central bank issuing the public currency is a greater menace to the liberties of the people than a standing army. We must not let our rulers load us with perpetual debt." And you're going to see today Trump arguing for unlimited debt. And supposedly he's against the establishment when he's basically giving the federal bank, the central bank, unlimited amount of control over everything. That should tell you everything, folks, where we have come. Moving on, still a little more to go here. The Jesuits used Biddle and Rothschild to gain the upper hand in American banking because they knew they could then control the people and effectively rewrite the Constitution according to papal law. Jackson was trying to stop them. Let us take a closer look at the central bank and see why it is so dangerous. Most people don't understand the central bank, the Federal Reserve Bank. Here's a very simplified scenario that pretty much explains one of the operations of the Federal Reserve. It is necessary to understand that the Federal Reserve Bank is not owned by the United States government, as many believe. The central bank, the Federal Reserve Bank, is a private bank owned by some of the richest and most powerful people in the world. This bank has nothing to do with the U.S. government other than the connection, which allows connection verbally. It's not federal law. There's nothing federal about the Federal Reserve, which allows the operation described below. The Federal Reserve Bank has a total government-enforced monopoly on money. Because we have the central bank, each individual bank competed with other banks. The customers, the consumers, got the best deal. Not anymore. So before we had the central bank, you had competition. It was an open market between various banks, and they competed with each other. But a central bank means they can dictate how money policy goes. And of course, if you can do that, then you can control everything. We all know that today the United States government borrows money and operates under astronomical debt. Why is this? Common sense dictates that a policy of such enormous debt will sooner or later destroy the organization that practices it, because the interest on its debt must increase beyond its income, making payoff impossible. Exactly. Now to our scenario. Here roughly is how the operation proceeds. Suppose the United States government wants to borrow $1 billion. The government issues a bond for this amount, which is a water company, which as much as a water company does when it wants to raise money for a new pipeline or a new dam. The government delivers this bond for the $1 billion to the Federal Reserve Bank. The Federal Reserve Bank takes the bond and writes an order to the Department of Printing and Engraving to print the $1 billion worth of bills. After about 2 weeks or so, when the bills are printed, the Department of Printing and Engraving ships the bills to the Federal Reserve Bank, which then writes a check for about $2,000 to pay for printing the $1 billion worth of bills. The Federal Reserve Bank then takes the $1 billion and lends the $1 billion to the United States government. And the people of the country pay interest at an exorbitant rate each year on this money, which came out of nothing. The owners of the Federal Reserve put up nothing for this money. That's right. You are, as the taxpayer, that's why we have all of this income tax with the Federal Reserve. It's all tied back to the Federal Reserve, folks. Your taxes, the majority of the taxes go towards paying for all of this astronomical debt that the government is borrowing from these central banking systems. We see, therefore, that when the United States government goes into debt $1, $1 plus the interest goes into the pockets of the owners of the Federal Reserve Bank. This is the largest, the most colossal theft ever perpetrated in the history of mankind, and it is so slick, so subtle, and so obfuscated by propaganda from the news media that the victims are not even aware of what is happening. You can see why the Jesuits want to keep this operation a secret. The Constitution of the United States gives to Congress the power to coin money. If Congress coined its own money as the Constitution directs, it would not have to pay the hundreds of billions of dollars of interest that it now pays each year to the bankers for national debt, for money that came out of nothing. Money coined by Congress would be debt-free, and therefore your taxes would be much, much lower too. But of course, the rich people, as you'll see in current events, know how to hide their money from taxes, while you and I pay our taxes for all of this basically theft. Biddle responded to Jackson's refusing to allow him to reestablish the central bank by shrinking the nation's money supply. He did this by refusing to make loans. By so doing, he upended the economy and money disappeared. So they've been manipulating the stocks and the markets and interest rates for as early as time began with this country. Keep that in mind for all the current events we're going to be looking at. Unemployment ran high. Companies went bankrupt because they could not pay their loans. Does that sound like anything recent to you in the last 20 years? The nation went into a panic depression. Biddle felt he could force Jackson to keep the central bank. So confident was he that he publicly boasted that he had caused the economic woes in America. There you go. Pride comes before destruction. Due to his foolish bragging, others came out in defense of Jackson, and the central bank died. There you go. It died until its reestablishment in 1913. It was reestablished then by the same people, the Jesuits of Rome, for the same purpose of bringing America to her knees and planting the temporal power of the Pope in America. The Jesuits' scheming for a central bank in America was temporarily stopped during the Andrew Jackson's presidency. He had opposed Calhoun's states' rights doctrine, and he stopped Biddle's attempt to continue the central bank. When other things fail, the Jesuit oath declares that it is commendable to murder someone who stands in their way. Quote, the president had earned the undying hatred of monetary scientists, both in America and abroad. The Jesuits were furious. It is not surprising, therefore, that on January 30th, 1835, an assassination attempt was made against Jackson. Miraculously, both pistols of the assailant misfired, and Jackson was spared by a quirk of fate. It was the first such attempt to be made against the life of a president of the United States. The would-be assassin was Richard Lawrence, who either was truly insane or who pretended to be insane to escape harsh punishment. I'll let you be the decider of that one. At any rate, Lawrence was found not guilty due to insanity. Later, he boasted to friends that he had been in touch with powerful people in Europe who had promised to protect him from punishment should he be caught. The Jesuit order was dead serious about taking over the United States. They infiltrated into the government at the highest levels and used their agents in controlling the American banking system. They would also use assassinations when necessary to destroy any opposition to their plan. Andrew Jackson was almost assassinated by a Jesuit plant who bragged of powerful Europeans, i.e. the Jesuits, that would set him free in case he was caught. Other presidents came along who also incurred the undying wrath of Rome. Several have been assassinated and a few escaped certain death. The next chapter we discuss the presidency of Henry Jackson, Zachary Taylor, James Buchanan, and so on. We'll look at these as well. So, what do we take from Andrew Jackson? Well, we can take a lot from it. From the very beginning, America was being assaulted by the Jesuits to become a sword for the papacy. From the very beginning. We talked about the previous ones with Thomas Jefferson and James Monroe and John Adams, all of them being assassinated. This is documented very well. You can look into it yourself. But from the very beginning, America was destined to be subjugated by the papacy. George Washington had a very strange death. Some say he was assassinated. Although Washington was a Mason, and he also supposedly had a icon of the Virgin Mary in his room. So there's a lot of strange things with Washington, but either way, from the very beginning, there's a lot of really strange things with America. In 1798, you had the Jesuit Georgetown University was founded. And remember, Universities are what? Universities are headquarters. So that was their headquarters of operations in the United States from the very, very beginning. Again, Adams, Jefferson, Monroe, and others were assassinated. There was constant pressure to basically foment a civil war and destroy the country, to basically enslave it to a central banking system. There were constant attempts for a central bank to be created. And of course, they were eventually successful. There's also many strange fires in the United States in the 1800s. If you look, this is from historylecture.org, Great American Fires of the 19th Century. This is a fascinating thing. I haven't looked too much into this myself, as to go and to each of these cities and see what have people written about these. But there are look at all these: Portsmouth, Detroit, Newburyport, Washington D.C., Buffalo, Boston, New York, Pittsburgh. Literally every other year, there's a major fire, going from all the way from 1802 to 1894. And of course, people tell you oh, this is just happened because they had certain issues with whatever else. They find some excuses for it, but I'm not convinced. Knowing everything that we've studied and that we're going to study, it's another element, another little pin to put in the chart, that there were huge destructive fires across the United States in the 1800s. Very, very interesting. Don't forget also that America had Catholic influences from the very beginning. This is Charles Carroll of Carrollton on Wikipedia. He was an American politician and signatory of the Declaration of Independence. He was the only Catholic signatory of the Declaration and the longest surviving, dying 56 years after its signing. Considered one of the founding fathers of the United States, Carroll was known contemporaneously as the first citizen of the American colonies, a consequence of signing articles in the Maryland Gazette with that pen name. He served as the delegate to Continental Congress and Confederation Congress. Carroll later served in the United States Senator for Maryland. Of all of the signers of the Declaration, Carroll was one of the wealthiest and most formally educated. A product of his 17-year Jesuit education in France, Carroll spoke 5 languages fluently. Was Carroll a Jesuit? I think so, and he was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. From the very beginning, they were infiltrated folks. It's truly profound how these people work. This is from Wikipedia, also John Carroll, Archbishop. So it's a different guy. But he was in the 1800s or late 1700s, early 1800s, was an American Catholic prelate who served as the Bishop of Baltimore, the first diocese in the United States. He later became the first Archbishop of Baltimore. Until 1808, Carroll administered the entire U.S. Catholic Church. He was a member of the Society of Jesus until its suppression in 1759. So, the one who administered the operations in the United States through Georgetown, through all of these delegates, through spies, was a Jesuit priest. Born to an aristocratic family, so from wealth, just like the other Carroll, in the colonial era province of Maryland, Carroll spent most of his early years as a priest in Europe, teaching and serving as a chaplain. After returning to Maryland in 1773, he started organizing the Catholic Church in America with a small cadre of priests. In other words, he began operations. The Vatican appointed him to several roles as leader of the American Catholic hierarchy, culminating in his appointment as Archbishop. Keep all this in mind when we get to Satan's government on earth, because this has been going on for a very long time. These archbishops and priests and cardinals, they're all agents. They're political agents, folks. You have to understand that. Carroll founded Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., and St. John the Evangelist Parish in Silver Spring, Maryland, the first secular parish in the country. So there's that. There's another Jesuit in the mix. This is the owner of the place where the White House was built. George Culver, first Baron of Baltimore, was an English peer and politician. He achieved domestic political success as a member of the Parliament of the Secretary of State under King James I. He lost much of his political power after his support for a failed marriage alliance between Prince Charles and the Spanish House of Habsburg royal family. Rather than continue in politics, he resigned all of his political offices in 1625, except for his position in the Privy Council, and declared his Catholicism publicly. So he became a Catholic agent. He was created Baron Baltimore in the peerage of Ireland upon his resignation. Baltimore Manor was located in County Longford, Ireland. Culver took an interest in the British colonization of the Americas, at first for commercial reasons and later to create a refuge for persecuted Irish and English Catholics, i.e. to bring the influx of Catholic immigration to basically dilute the population of America and turn it Catholic. You'll understand how that immigration was used very strategically. He became the proprietor of Avalon, the first sustained English settlement on the southeastern peninsula on the island of Newfoundland. Discouraged by its cold and sometimes inhospitable climate and the sufferings of the settlers, he looked for a more suitable spot further south and sought a new royal charter to settle the region, which would become the state of Maryland, as in the state of Mary, the Virgin Mary. Culvert died 5 weeks before the new charter was sealed, leaving the settlement of the Maryland colony to his son Cecil. His second son, Leonard Culvert, was the first colonial governor of the province of Maryland. So the owner of the state of Maryland was a Catholic, probably a Jesuit, but either way, he was definitely rewarded for converting to Catholicism, as you saw. So there's that. Then, of course, you have the White House, which is named after Andrew White, who was a Jesuit. Andrew White was an English Jesuit Catholic missionary who was involved in the founding of the Maryland colony. A chronicler of the colonial Maryland, his writings remain a primary source on the land, the Native Americans, and the Jesuit mission in North America. For his efforts in converting and educating the Native American population, White has been frequently referred to as the Apostle of Maryland. He is considered a forefather of Georgetown University and is memorized in the White Gravener building. So, Jesuits were very, very, very involved in the very beginning. This is from ghostofdc.org. Washington was originally named Rome, Maryland. Did you know that? Let's read. Rome in America, a 17th century vision. In the 17th century, a vast estate of 400 acres existed southeast of what is now Georgetown in Maryland. Owned by an Italian culture enthusiast, this land was ambitiously named Rome. The owner's passion for Italy didn't just influence the name, it shaped his vision of the New World. This estate was more than land, it was a symbol of aspiration and connection to ancient civilizations. Which ancient civilization is that, I wonder? Transitioning from European inspiration to American reality, the landowner renamed Goose Creek to Tiber Creek. This act mirrored Rome's iconic river Tiber River, creating a symbolic link across the continents. You really can't make this up, folks. You really can't make it up. His vision was to merge the grandeur of ancient Rome with the budding potential of America. Image of the beast coming to life over hundreds of years. Francis Pope, the mastermind behind Rome, Maryland. The visionary behind this American Rome was Francis Pope, who acquired the land on June 5th, 1663. His story, detailed in an October 7, 1883 Washington Post article, reflects a blend of ambition and whimsy. Pope took pride in his estate, often boasting about his Rome on the Tiber. His unique naming scheme wasn't just a personal quirk, it was a statement of cultural identity and historical awareness. Very aware of history, I'm sure. Francis Pope's legacies extend beyond mere land ownership. He imbued his estate with a sense of historical and cultural significance. His choice to name the creek Tiber Creek was a deliberate effort to echo the greatness of ancient Rome in the new American landscape. Was Rome's greedy paws all over the United States from the beginning? Yes. A modern twist, the coincidence of Pope Francis. Gosh, what a coincidence that Pope Francis is named Pope Francis. And, of course, the person who owned all this land and was beginning Maryland was named Francis Pope. There are no coincidences, folks. There are no coincidences because Pope Francis is a Jesuit. So it tells you who is going to take over this country, who has already taken over it, and who is going to basically tell it what to do left or right. So America's destiny was clear from the very beginning. Hopefully you can understand that. And it's truly amazing to see all these things because, again, it proves that the Bible is true. The relationship between the false prophet and the beast is that the beast works signs in its presence, meaning it's subjugated to the beast. Do you get it? The beast is there on its throne sitting in the court, and the people are watching the false prophet do, oh, wow, ooh, ah, that's the vision. But the false prophet is in the presence of the beast, meaning it's subjugated to it. And of course, in 1814, again, the Jesuits were reinstated by the papacy. They knew how to play ball at that point. They realized that the Jesuits were going to assassinate them if they weren't. So they reinstated the Jesuits in 1814, and one of the first items on that list was to subjugate the United States, because the United States had been found in the time between the Jesuits being banned in Europe and them being reinstated in the 1800s. And of course, you know that they were very active, even though the Jesuits were banned. They're very active in the world, and we can see this in many places. This is an article by Daryl Eberhardt, Plans to Destroy the American Constitutional Republic. and editor of ETI. We read articles from ETI from 1970s. Remember those 1970s articles about the Jesuits and communism? This is the same magazine, I believe. Congress of Vienna. The Congress of Vienna was held from 1814 to 1815 in Vienna, Austria. Various European monarchs got together at the urging of Papal Rome in order to plan the destruction of the American Constitutional Republic. European monarchs, again at the urging of Papal Rome, met at Verona, Italy in 1822 for part 2 of the secret meetings for planning the destruction of America. Later, high-level Jesuits met in 1825 at Chieri, Italy, to fine-tune those plans for destroying the American Constitutional Republic. The bloody American Civil War of 1861 to 65 took place as a result of these sinister plans made at these 3 secret meetings in the 19th century. And if you remember, in 1823, was it, the Monroe Doctrine? Basically throwing the gauntlet down, saying, we're not going to bow down to you. And of course, that was basically sealing their fate. So there's that. So what do we take from all of this? We have one more, actually, before we take a little bit. This is Romanism versus Americanism, the Roman Catholic System by T.W. Calloway. And we are going to look on, what page is this? 124, is it? 124 of the PDF, but the actual page is 117 to, we'll see what pages, but it's a couple pages. So starting on page 17, this is chapter 12 of that book, Church and State. It is our claim that no consistent Roman Catholic can at the same time be 100% American, because the very laws that make him a Catholic prevent him from being a good citizen of the American Republic. Rome stands as the sworn and relentless enemy of the things most dear to every true American. Freedom of conscience, both political and religious, free speech, free press, free public schools, civil marriages, separation of church and state. As to the union of church and state, we quote the following from Catholic sources. Pope Pius, the church, Catholic, obviously, and state should be united. Bishop O'Connor, religious liberty is merely endured until the opposite can be carried into the effect without peril to the Catholic Church. Do you understand? I hope that all of this is going to set the stage for what is happening today, when people talk about church and state and what is happening. I'll read this one again because it was very profound. Bishop O'Connor, religious liberty is merely endured until the opposite, i.e., complete religious dominance, can be carried into effect without peril to the Catholic Church. Cardinal Gibbons, for our part, we have every confidence that ere long the clouds which now overshadow the civil throne of the Pope will be removed by the breath of a righteous God, and that his temporal power will be established on a more permanent basis than ever. Page 180, Faith of Our Fathers. This is the man so long sitting at Baltimore where he could spy out the affairs of Washington, and who grows optimistic of that coming day of the union of the Catholic Church and this government. And of course, the Bible tells you of that day. It was far from them when they were living it, but it's not far from us. It's the image of the beast. Cardinal Manning, in his sermon at Kensington, England, 1879, when speaking for the Pope, he said the following: I claim to be the supreme judge and director of the conscience of men, of the peasant who tills the field, and of the prince that sits upon the throne, or the household who sits in the shade of privacy, and the legislature that makes the laws for the kingdoms. I am the sole, last, supreme judge of what is right and wrong. Speaking on behalf of the Pope. Now, does that go in alignment with all the things we read about the Pope's statements of themselves, about other people's statements of the Pope? Absolutely. Dollinger, the ardent Romanist, in his message, Washington in the Lap of Rome. Page 243 to 254 says, I wonder if they understand in America that an infallible Pope means, what an infallible Pope means. That it means a hand stretched over the United States and laid upon every Roman Catholic citizen, imposing upon him the obligation to set himself up in opposition to the ordinances of your government whenever the Pope shall pronounce his judgment against those ordinances on a moral or religious ground. Do you understand the weight of this statement? The idea is that the people who are loyal Roman Catholics have a sovereign king already who tells them what is right or wrong, and they have to obey that king over and against whatever temporal. It's like you would be obeying God, right? And the time will come where you will have to disobey the government in order to obey God. The time will come for that, folks. That's what the Bible warns you, that you will be forced into a decision to do that. And of course, we should disobey the government when it is contrary to God's moral laws. We should. We cannot obey the government because God is the creator. He's the authority on everything that's right or wrong. So when those two things are in conflict, we have to obey God. But if you as a militant Catholic see that basically the Pope is God on earth and you're obeying the Pope as God, that is a threat to every sovereign nation. Do you understand? Every serious militant Catholic who obeys the Pope cannot be a loyal American citizen, according to all of these testimonies. Priest McDermott, in a sermon in Philadelphia, April 15th, 1894, says the following: I admit the Pope can absolve Catholics from allegiance to the form of government under which they reside. School books. The Abridged Course of Religious Instruction, page 178, and used in all papal schools of America, says the following: The civil laws are binding in consequence so long as they are conformable to the rights of the Catholic Church. Page 203 says, the Church can dispense from promissory oath. The power belongs to the Pope and the bishops who exercise it either themselves or by their delegates. Pope Pius IX, in his encyclical December 8, 1864, says the following: It is error to hold that in the case of conflicting laws between the two powers, church and state, the civil law ought to prevail. It's an error to think that the state has the power, because Satan gave his power and throne and great authority to the papal institution. Papacy and the Civil Power, pages 172 to 173 says, quote, Interpreted by the Protestant principle, so widely diffused among us, we do not accept it, or hold it to be any government at all, or as capable of performing any of the functions of government. If the American government is to be sustained at all, it must be by the rejection of the principles of the Reformation, separation of church and state, and the acceptance of the Catholic principle by the American people. The Missionary, a Catholic paper, June 1909, page 69, says the following: Many non-Catholics fear us as a political organization and are afraid that the Catholic Church will dominate and rule. We are working quietly, seriously, and I may say effectively, to that end. They tell you, right up front. Dr. O.A. Bronson, the Catholic authority to whom reference has already been made, says the following: Undoubtedly, it is the intention of the Pope to possess this country. In this intention, he is aided by the Jesuits and by all the Catholic prelates and priests. Catholic Register, April 16, 1914, says the following: There is no crime that the doting warrior, General Miles, who was at the head of the Guardian of the Liberty and the anti-Catholic organization, charges against us to which we must not plead guilty. He says that we are trying to make the United States a Catholic country. We are most certainly doing all in our power to accomplish it. That was in the Catholic Register, April 16, 1914. The Catholic Sun says the following: The Pope has given the order to make America Roman Catholic. The first step in making it will be the election of one of the American cardinals to the papacy, the removal of St. Peter's to Washington, Cardinal Gibbons to the president, and every non-Catholic will be driven out of the Army and Navy. Now, this is a fascinating quote to me, and the reason it is, I've talked about Vigano and the split in the Catholic Church that's happening. You'll see some examples of that when we go to current events. There's a split happening in the Catholic Church. And you have this Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano that was the papal nuncio to the United States. He's hardcore traditionalist, hardcore conservative. He's calling out the Jesuits. He's calling out the deep church, basically the deep state, and the globalist conspiracy. And he's doing quite a lot. And we know that if you're actually, basically against the Jesuits and you're in a public office, you're not going to last very long. So something is really fishy with this. Now, it'd be interesting to see if he would be the next pope. I think he'd be a good candidate. I'm not saying he is going to be, but I think if anybody has arisen to the candidacy in the public forum, it would be Vigano. And Vigano, if that's the case, would be interesting to see if they move the papacy to the United States. That would be in fulfillment of this particular agenda here, to move the papacy to the United States. And of course, the United States would be the first place where the image of the beast arises. That would be quite something. So anyway, I'm not saying that's going to happen exactly like that, but it's interesting to show you that from 100 years ago, I don't know when this quote was from the Catholic Sun, but I'm assuming, let's say 100 years ago, at least, that this was the intention, and you see these things playing out in history today, which is fascinating. Moving on, a couple more. Archbishop Ireland says, remember the words of this archbishop when he says, quote, we can have the United States in 10 years, and I give you 3 points for your consideration: the Indian, the Negroes, and the common schools. All of these were dialectics that were run. with the Indians, with the slave conflict of the Civil War, and of course, the common schools being the universities educating people. But does the Catholic Church stop with simply favoring the union of church and state? Not at all. She demands absolute dominion of the state by the Roman Catholic Church so she can enforce her laws. The canon law, which is the undisputed fundamental code of Romanism, reveals the spirit of Rome to be inimical to the very genius of our government, which holds the two apart and insists that the state must get its orders from the church. Dr. G.F. van Schult, professor of canonical law at Prague, states succinctly the relation of the church and state from a Roman Catholic viewpoint as the following. Number 1. All human power is from evil and must therefore be standing under the Pope. Number 2. The temporal powers must act unconditionally and in accordance with the orders of the spiritual, i.e., the Pope. Number 3. The Church is empowered to grant or take away any temporal possessions. The Pope, number 4, the Pope has the right to give countries and nations which are non-Catholic to Catholic regents who can reduce them to slavery. Number 5. The Pope can make slaves of these Christian subjects, i.e. Protestants, whose prince or ruling power is interdicted by the Pope. Number 6. The laws of the Church concerning the liberty of the papal power are based upon divine inspiration. Number 7. The Church has the right to practice unconditional censure of books. Number 8. The Pope has the right to annul state laws, treaties, constitutions, etc. to absolve from obedience as soon as they seem detrimental to the rights of the Church or those of the clergy. Nor does the Roman Catholic Church stop with demanding that the state be entirely dominated by the Church. It proceeds to the treacherous extent of saying that no member of the Catholic Church is to consider binding upon him any civil oath or law when they come into conflict with the interests of the Church. That's right. You, as a militant Catholic, are obeying the Pope and the Church as you would obey God. That's why, and because the Catholic Church is an empire, it is a threat to every sovereign state in the world. So there's more here in this book, Romanism versus Americanism. I highly recommend it. A lot of good material in there. But what do we take from all this? What we take is that if you look at today, 25% of America is Catholic, and it's rising. There's revivals happening, and people are going back to religion, embracing Catholicism. Major people in media and in politics are converting to Catholicism. Influencers, political figures like J.D. Vance and so on. The Supreme Court is a majority Catholic. Of course, remember some previous articles we talked about, like the 40,000 Agents, the one in 1979, and Jesuits involved in revolutions. In 1970, 25% of the Jesuit presence was concentrated in America. I don't know what it is now, but again, that tells you everything based on the early history of the United States that we were talking here. Government officials are Catholic, various orders like Knights of Malta, Knights of Columbus, Jesuit agents. Remember Steve Bannon was talking, I didn't quote this in this presentation, but one of my Venerable Day of the Sun episodes where he's basically interviewed by Tucker Carlson, and he's talking about, I do the Jesuit exercise, basically saying the Ignatian spiritual exercises, which are Jesuit submission exercises. And he's militant Catholic. He's got a little, basically a shrine behind him and during his interview. So these people are all Catholic insiders, folks. Another example would be this one. This is Bill Barr. He's a Knights of Malta member. William Barr is neck deep in extremist Catholic institutions. He's a Knights of Malta member. There he is with Trump, and they know who their puppet masters are. So Bill Barr and many others like him, that's just one example, that are just, CIA, FBI, Knights of Malta, Knights of Columbus members. Remember, the founder of the CIA was a Bonaparte, connected to the whole thing there with the Jesuits and Napoleon and so on. It's one big club, folks. Today, the vice president is Catholic. Trump is surrounded by Project 2025, Opus Dei, Kevin Roberts, all these people who are militant Catholics. J.D. Vance is a puppet of Peter Thiel, who's a liberal Catholic, probably Knights of Malta member. You have the Al Smith Catholic dinner every year in New York between both parties show up, and there's, basically friendly, and who's in the middle? It's the Archbishop of New York who facilitates it, which tells you that both parties are controlled by the power that sits in the middle. And of course, everybody is into the club one way or another. This is something from Instagram, some random video. Let's see what it says. Oh, there's this silence. Let's see. They're all part of the same bloodline. That's what I wanted to say.
Bloodline, so they go long, back in history. The fact that they walk on the red carpet, only queens and kings walk on red carpets. So how come your American presidents are doing it? Because their bloodline, 43 American presidents, all the ones who became president, are directly linked to British monarchs by blood. From Roosevelt, in fact, all of them, all the ones who became president are linked by bloodline to royal families, and the walking on the red carpet, which is the bloodline, proves it. New World Order is found in Latin underneath the pyramid on the dollar bill, Norvis Oda Seclorum, which comes from the Latin poet Ovid. So it's an old Roman concept, Roman term. Roman symbolism is something that needs to be studied because you have the Roman eagle, which was then picked up by the Nazis, and now you find it in America. You find it at the top of the flagpoles, you find it on the federal government, you find it on the dollar bill, the symbol of the eagle. In the landing on the moon, you hear them talking about the eagle has landed. You know, what kind of eagle are we talking about here? And Novus Ordo Seclorum, New World Order, has a resonance with Nazi Germany because in Nazi Germany, you have Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler's first book, the most important known book, was called Mein Kampf.
Which, by the way, a Jesuit wrote, don't forget.
But his second book was actually called The New World Order. They kept on using this term about 1,000-year kingdom. Then we have George Bush later on talking about the 1,000 points of light. All right? We have George Bush using the term New World Order, I think it was in 2000, on September 11th. It's fraternity.
So one big happy family. Here's another one. This is the, where is the Villa Farnese? This is what I wanted to say. This is from Cultural Heritage Online. This is one of the buildings of these papal families, Villa Farnese. It's Farnese Fortress. You can see what the design is. And of course, if you know another building in America that is very similar to this, it's Pentagon. This is based on one of the papal family's fortresses of a pentagon. Of course, for them, these are occult symbols. And these buildings are also, like giant altars in some sense where they're doing all sorts of crazy things. So who knows what exactly the tie is. I didn't bother to document too much, but I'm sure that there's a connection there as well. And of course, a lot of people have documented it quite a bit. But you know by now that America is a daughter of Rome. Spiritually, America was taken over very easily because Protestantism has become lukewarm, ecumenical, apostate. They believe Catholic doctrines. And of course, politically and financially, America was subjugated a long time ago through war, assassinations, intrigue, central banking. So the destiny of America is very soon to be the image of the beast, meaning to create this form of government that will give power back to the Roman pontiff and market that system to the rest of the world. And you'll see various ways that that's going to happen in the current events. But the point is, it's going to be very easy, folks. It's going to be very, very easy. We are now behind all of these things that have happened. The things that I read to you happened 150 years ago, 200 years ago. Okay? So we are well past them. America has been subjugated. We are at the end of the end. Just another point to reiterate that we are at the end of the end. We don't have 50 years of this madness. Thank God that we don't have 50 years of this madness. I don't believe we have 20 years of this madness. I think things are going to happen very quickly. I think within the next 10 years, you will see this image of the beast coming to life, creating Sunday laws, and enforcing worship. America is the new Rome, and it always was. That was the plan from the very beginning. And its destiny is to bring that government to the rest of the world. And through it, the Roman Catholic Church and the pontiff will be resurrected, and people will marvel after the beast. Now, let's talk about Buchanan. This is Buchanan, Harrison Taylor Buchanan. Yes, this is what I want to talk about. This is chapter 3. This is the next chapter in Bill Hughes' book. And here we go. You can see it good. William Henry Harrison was elected to the presidency of the United States in the year 1841. He was already well up in the years at 67, but he was very healthy and robust. All who knew him felt that he would have no problem going through his full 4 years in office. However, just 35 days after taking the oath of office, President Harrison was dead on April 4th, 1841. Most, if not all, encyclopedias will tell you that he died of pneumonia after giving his inaugural address in the severe cold of Washington, D.C., but that is not correct. He did not die of pneumonia. When Harrison came to office, a very tense situation existed in the country. Trouble was brewing between the North and the South over the issue of slavery. There was contention over the annexation of Texas, whether it would be admitted free or slave. An attempt had been made on President Jackson's life just 6 years before. Harrison took office a short 20 years before the Civil War. The influence of the Jesuits was weighing heavily upon America. As we have already seen, the Congress of Vienna, Verona, and Chieri were determined to destroy popular government wherever it was found. The prime target was the United States and the destruction of every Protestant principle. The despicable Jesuits were ordered to carry out this destruction. Andrew Jackson faced the onslaught of the Jesuits via the political minefields of John C. Calhoun and financial wizardry of Nicholas Biddle. William Henry Harrison had also refused to go along with the Jesuits' goal for America. In his inaugural address, he made the following comments. "We admit of no government by divine right," i.e., by the Pope, "believing that so far as power is concerned, the beneficial Creator has made no distinction among men, that all are upon an equality, and that the only legitimate right to govern is upon the express grant of power from the governed." Oof! Boy, did that sting. That was documented by Burke McCarthy, The Suppressed Truth About the Assassination of Abraham Lincoln. Page 44. By that statement, President Harrison had just incurred the deadly wrath of the Jesuits. Just like Monroe. With these unmistakable words, President Harrison made his position clear. He hurled defiance to the divine right enemies of the popular government. Burke McCarthy is talking about the Rome when he says that, yeah. He did more for those were words that signed his death warrant. Just 1 month and 5 days from that day, President Harrison lay a corpse in the White House. He died from arsenic poisoning administered by the tools of Rome. The Jesuit oath had been swiftly carried out. And of course, we looked at the Jesuit oath. For nearly 1,000 years, the Roman Catholic popes felt that they ruled by divine right, that their power had come directly from God, and that all men were to bow to their authority and control. Really quick, does that confirm everything that we've read before? All those papal documents, the papal decrees, what people thought about the Pope? Absolutely. This is not a conspiracy theory. If a ruler would not submit to his position in the country he ruled into the hands of the Pope, then that person had no right to rule. When Harrison stated that we admit of no government by divine right, he was declaring that he and the United States were in no way going to submit to the Pope's control. To the Pope and his heinous Jesuits, this was a slap in the face that they felt must be dealt with immediately. It was not Harrison alone that had rejected Rome's authority, for he was simply stating that the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution had declared before him what those documents had declared before him. Our republic totally refused the control that the Pope and the Jesuits were trying to apply. When a nation, church, or individual refuses to submit to the authority of the papacy, they are finished. Unless God intervenes, the lives of those opposing the papacy will be terminated. This concept is completely foreign to the thinking of people who lived under a free constitutional government. The inalienable rights to worship God according to the dictates of one's own conscience and a government without a king are taken for granted in the United States today. Are they taken for granted? Absolutely. We don't realize that Harrison's statement was a dagger aimed at the heart of the papacy's existence. Another ruler who refused to be dictated to by the papacy was Queen Elizabeth of England. She was one of Henry VIII's daughters and ruled England from 1558 to 1603. She ascended the throne following the death of her half-sister Bloody Mary, who ruled England from 1553 to 1558. Mary had been a Catholic sovereign, but Elizabeth was a Protestant. Quote, after her accession, Elizabeth wrote to Sir Richard Crane, the English ambassador in Rome, to notify the people of her accession, but she was informed by His Holiness, the Pope, that England was a fief, a servant or a slave of the Holy See, that Elizabeth had no right to assume the crown without his permission, and that she was not born in lawful wedlock and could not therefore reign over England, that her safest course was to renounce all claims to the throne and submit herself entirely to his will. Then he would treat her as tenderly as possible. But if she refused his advice, he would not spare her. She declined the Pope's advice, and the hatred of Pius and his successors was assured. Nothing new under the sun. Queen Elizabeth wisely rejected the assumed divine right of the papacy to rule over and control the throne of England. Because of this, there were at least 5 attempts to assassinate her. These attempts all failed because she had a superb Secret Service group, and her life was saved. When the papacy realized that all her efforts to assassinate Elizabeth had failed, all their efforts, they turned to one of their Catholic sons, Philip II of Spain. In 1580, the papacy arranged for Spain to invade England. Now, I think this is the where the English ships destroyed the Spanish Armada and humiliated them, because the English had really tiny ships, and the Spanish Armada was like they're very, very deadly, but they're super slow. And so they got outmaneuvered. It was a very interesting historical situation. But this is what it says. Later on, it was Pope Sixtus X who promised Philip of Spain 1,000,000 scudi to assist in equipping his invincible armada to destroy the throne of Elizabeth. Yeah. And the only condition the Pope made in bestowment of this gift, he should have the nomination of the English sovereign, and that the kingdom should become a fief of the church. So go and take them out, and the only request I have is that I'm the one who puts the next leader in charge. The famous Spanish Armada was sent to crush England because Elizabeth would not give her throne and kingdom to the Pope. For 30 years, the Jesuits tried to kill Elizabeth but failed. Finally, they conspired with Philip II of Spain to annihilate her with the Armada. We charge the popes of the succession with being the prime movers in the entire adult life of Elizabeth to deliberately destroy her and her kingdom, forcing England's return to the dominion of their evil enslaving system called the Roman Catholic Church. Not only was the Pope the prime mover of the seditious intrigues in England, but he was the mainspring of the ongoing treachery. The Pope insisted on exercising absolute authority and sovereignty over all the kings and princes, and dared to assume the prerogatives of deity in wielding his spiritual and temporal swords. Now, do you remember about the Pope having 2 swords from those papal documents? So, that's true. Likewise, as William Henry Harrison took his oath to become President of the United States, the Jesuits saw a man that openly opposed them in their plans. Unfortunately, President Harrison was poisoned just 35 days into his term of office. This is from The Adder's Den by John Smith Dye. General Harrison did not die of natural disease. No failure of health or strength existed, but something sudden and fatal. He did not die of apoplexy, that is, a disease. But arsenic would produce a sudden effect, and it would also be fatal from the commencement. This is the chief weapon of the medical assassin. Oxalic acid, prussic acid, or salts of strychnine would be almost instant death, and would give but little advantage for escape to the murderer. Therefore, this was not a case of acute poisoning, when death takes place almost instantaneously, but of a chronic situation where the patient dies slowly. He lived about 6 days after he received the drug. United States Senator Thomas Benton concurs, quote, "There was no failure of health or strength to indicate such an event, or to excite apprehension that he would not go through his term with the same vigor with which he commenced it. His attack was sudden and even fatal from the commencement." Senator Thomas Benton, 30 Years View, Volume 2, page 21. William Henry Harrison became the first president to fall victim of the Jesuits in their attempt to take over the United States, destroyed the Constitution, and installed the papacy as the supreme ruler of America. If any U.S. president or any leader refused to take orders from the Jesuits, they too would be targets of assassination. Zachary Taylor refused to go along with the destruction of America, and he was the next one to fall. Taylor was known as a great military man. His friends called him Old Rough and Ready. He came to the White House in 1848, and 16 months later, he was dead. They used the invasion of Cuba as the test for President Taylor and had their plans ready to launch their nefarious scheme in the early part of his administration. But from the very beginning, President Taylor snuffed out all the hope of its consummation during his term. He knew what was up. This is from Burke McCarty. Here is what would have happened if Zachary Taylor had invaded Cuba. There was Catholic Austria, Catholic Spain, Catholic France, and England all waiting ready to do battle with the United States if America had invaded Cuba. Kind of like how Kennedy was pressured into doing something with Cuba just to basically bring another war into the United States. What chance would this young republic have had against the United powers of Catholic Europe at that time? The papacy well understood this, and this is why they pushed Taylor so hard to invade. Taylor committed another crime against Rome. He spoke passionately about the preservation of the Union. The Jesuits were striving hard to split the nation in two, and the president was trying hard to keep it together. Jesuit agent John C. Calhoun visited the Department of State and requested the president to say nothing in his forthcoming message about the Union. But Calhoun had little influence over Taylor, for after his visit, the following remarkable passage was added to Taylor's speech. Quote, "Attachment to the Union States should be fostered in every American heart. For more than half a century during which kingdoms and empires have fallen, this union has stood unshaken. In my judgment, its dissolution would be the greatest of calamities to avert that should be the steady aim of every American. Upon its preservation must depend our own happiness and that of the generations to come. Whatever dangers may threaten it, I shall stand by it and maintain it in its integrity to the full extent of the obligations imposed and power conferred upon me by the Constitution. McCarty picks up the story from here. Quote, there was no quibbling in this. The pro-slavery leaders had nothing to count on in Taylor, therefore they decided on his assassination. The arch-plotters, fearing that the suspicion might be aroused by the death of the president early in his administration, as is the case of President Harrison, permitted him to serve 1 year and 4 months when the 4th of July arsenic was administered to him during a celebration in Washington in which he was invited to deliver the address. He went in perfect health in the morning and was taken ill in the afternoon about 5 o'clock and died on the Monday following, having been sick the same number of days and with precisely the same symptoms as was his predecessor, President Harrison. This is by Burke McCarty. The slave power, the Jesuits, had now sufficient reason to count him as an enemy, and his history gave them to understand that he never surrendered. Those having slavery politically committed to their care had long before sworn that no person should ever occupy the presidential chair that opposed their schemes in the interest of slavery. They resolved to take his life. This, the slave power, the Jesuits understood, and they determined to serve him as they had previously served General Harrison, and only awaited a favorable opportunity to carry out their hellish intent. The celebration of the 4th of July was near at hand, and it was resolved to take advantage of that day and give him the fatal drug. A favorite assassination day of the Jesuits, which is the 4th of July. 6 years later, James Buchanan, a Pennsylvania Democrat, was elected president. James Buchanan had wined and dined with the Southerners, and it appeared as though he would go along with their desires. Quote, the new president proved himself a decided trimmer. Although he was a Northern man, he had strongly courted the Southern leaders and given them to understand that he was with them heart and soul. In short, he would double-cross them. The gentleman had his ear to the ground evidently and had heard the rumble of the abolitionists' wheels. He coolly informed them that he was president of the North as well as the South. The change of attitude was indicated by his very decided stand against Jefferson Davis and his party, and he made known his intention of settling the question of slavery in the free states to the satisfaction of the people in those states. James Buchanan did not have to wait long to find out what the Jesuits would do to him for double-crossing them. On Washington's birthday, Buchanan's stand became known, and the next day he was poisoned. The plot was deep and planned with skill. Mr. Buchanan, as was customary with men in his station, had a table and chairs reserved for himself and friends in the dining room at the National Hotel. The president was known to be an inveterate tea drinker. In fact, Northern people rarely drink anything else in the evening. Southern men prefer coffee. Thus, to make sure Buchanan and his Northern friends, arsenic was sprinkled in the bowls containing the tea and lump sugar and set on the table where he was to sit. The pulverized sugar in the bowls used for the coffee on the other tables was kept free from the poison. Not a single Southern man was affected or harmed. 50 or 60 persons dined at the table that evening, and as nearly as can be learned, about 38 died from the effects of the poison. President Buchanan was poisoned, and with great difficulty his life was saved. His physicians treated him understandingly from instructions given by himself as to the cause of the illness, for he understood well what the matter was. Since the appearance of the epidemic, the tables at the National Hotel have been almost empty. Have the proprietors of the hotel or clerks or servants suffered from it? If not, what respect did their diet and accommodations differ from those of the guests? There is more in this calamity than meets the eye. It's a matter that should not be trifled with. The New York Post, March 18th, 1857. James Buchanan was poisoned and almost died. He lived because he knew that he had been given arsenic poisoning, so he informed his doctors. He knew that the Jesuits poisoned Harris and Taylor. The Jesuit order fulfilled their oath again. They would poison, kill, or do whatever was necessary to remove those who opposed their plans. From 1841 to 1857, we saw that 3 presidents were attacked by the Jesuits as outlined in the Congress of Vienna, Verona, and Chieri. 2 died and 1 barely escaped. They allowed nothing to stand in their way of total domination of America and the destruction of the Constitution. As they look at America, the priests of Rome have stated, quote, we are also determined to take possession of the United States, but we must proceed with utmost secrecy. Silently and patiently we must mass our Roman Catholics in the great cities of the United States, remembering that the vote of a poor journeyman, though he be covered with rags, has much more weight in the scale of powers as the millionaire Astor has as much weight as a millionaire, and that if we have 2 votes against his 1, he will become as powerless as an oyster. Let us then multiply our votes. Let us call our poor but faithful Irish Catholics from every corner of the world and gather them into the very hearts of the cities of Washington, New York, Boston, Chicago, Buffalo, Albany, Troy, and Cincinnati. Remember when I told you that we're going to use at the time in the past, immigration, mass immigration, to change the demographics so that they could have control of the country? Under the shadows of those great cities, the Americans consider themselves a giant unconquerable race. They look upon the poor Irish Catholics with supreme contempt, as only fit to dig their canals, sweep their streets, and work in their kitchens. Let no one awake those sleeping lions today. Let us pray God that they continue to sleep a few years longer, waking only to find their votes outnumbered, as we will turn them forever out of every position of honor, power, and profit. What will those so-called giants think when not a single senator or member of Congress will be chosen unless he has submitted to our Holy Father, the Pope? We will not only elect the president, but fill and command the armies, men, the navies, and hold the keys of the public treasury. Then we will rule the United States and lay them at the feet of the Vicar of Jesus Christ, that he may put an end to their godless system of education and impious laws of liberty of conscience, which are an insult to God and man. This is by Charles Chiniquy, 50 Years in the Church of Rome, page 281 to 282. So, does that confirm everything that you've read so far? Absolutely. So far, we have seen 6 presidents were assassinated. 1 has had an attempted assassination on him, Buchanan, and that's in less than 100 years of America's history. Plus, countless intrigues, the Cuban crisis, the central banks, the Civil War, pushing, with the slavery issue, and so on and so forth. Notice all of the confirmations of the previous sections, like the Jesuit oath, papal supremacy, Catholic attitudes of subversion, so on and so forth. Catholicism is inherently at odds with the principles of the United States, like liberty of conscience, freedom to speak whatever you want. All of these freedoms are inherently in conflict with Catholicism, because again, Catholicism acknowledges a supreme political and spiritual leader that takes precedence above any other authority. And Catholicism is an empire. Therefore, Catholicism is in complete conflict with any country that is a sovereign country. That's why when you hear Catholicism and the Catholic narrative talk about the common good or religious liberty, Catholicism will always fight for religious tolerance and liberty in countries where it is not dominant. In countries that are subjugated, it doesn't care about religious liberty. In fact, it cares about the opposite, as you clearly have seen from so many quotes from Catholic sources, from Catholic priests, from Catholic officials, documents. It doesn't care about religious liberty. It cares about religious liberty when it's not dominant. So that's very important. Of course, it also will push the common good narrative. We have to have the common good. What is the common good? Who determines the common good? That's what you always have to ask. Who determines the common good? Who is the one that says what is good for everybody? And of course, that person is the Pope. That's why the common good is a Jesuit term, and it has to be a Fennec Fox moment for you. So this is why no serious Catholic and person who is a member of the Catholic orders, like Bill Barr, like, Steve Bannon, who's doing the Jesuit exercise, you cannot trust these people to be in alignment with American values. Now, when you see Trump surrounded by these people, and you see people on the Supreme Court being mostly Catholic, the vice president converted to Catholicism, and he's probably a member of one of these Catholic orders. He's a puppet. Peter Thiel. All of these people are puppets, folks. That's why you have to understand the Synagogue of Satan. It's not just the Jews, and certainly most of the Synagogue of Satan is not Jewish. It's Catholic. But either way, this is why the early founding fathers were afraid of the Jesuits taking advantage of the religious liberty that America offered. It was open to all and tolerated all, and as a result, they allowed the Jesuits to come in, and they took advantage of it. Now, let's talk about Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln is the next one up, and of course, he is the final one in this whole history because he leads us to the Civil War. Chapter 4 of the book. In 1856, a runaway slave named Dred Scott had sought to gain freedom in the free state of Kansas. The case was so important that it went all the way to the Supreme Court. The infamous Dred Scott decision was rendered by the fanatical Roman Catholic judge Taney, the Chief Justice of the United States at the time. The Taney decision, in a nutshell, was that the Negro had no rights and the white man had no that had to respect these rights. Basically, black people didn't have any rights. This is basically said that black man was inferior to the white man and had no rights. Abraham Lincoln, as a child, had watched the selling of young black men and women in his small Illinois town. As he and a friend walked past the slave auction, Lincoln turned to his friend and said, "Someday I am going to hit it hard." In November of 1855, Charles Chiniquy, a Catholic priest of Kankakee, Illinois, had been attacked in a series of court cases by the Bishop of Chicago Diocese. Chiniquy had spoken often on the subject of temperance and the evils of liquor. Since many of the priests were alcoholics and most of the others were social drinkers, Chiniquy's talks on temperance were not appreciated. Chiniquy often quoted the Bible in defense of certain positions he held. This greatly inflamed the Catholic Bishop of Chicago against him. In order to silence him, Chiniquy was framed, being accused by an immoral priest's female relative of misconduct towards her. Charles Chiniquy's case had been so publicized in the Illinois press that very few lawyers wanted to defend him. They realized that they were not just fighting against a priest in Chicago, they were fighting against the Roman Catholic Church. Charles Chiniquy learned of Abe Lincoln, a very loyal and upright lawyer in Illinois. Chiniquy sent Lincoln a wire asking for his services, and within 20 minutes of Chiniquy's wire, he got a reply that said, "Yes, I will defend your life and your honor at the next May term of the court at Urbana. Signed, A. Lincoln." Chiniquy relates the following. "The time arrived when the sheriff of Kankakee had to drag me again as a criminal and a prisoner to Urbana and deliver me into the hands of the sheriff of that city. I arrived there on the 20th of October with my lawyers, Monsignors Osgood and Paddock, and a dozen witnesses. Mr. Abraham Lincoln had preceded me only by a few minutes from Springfield. When Charles Chiniquy was defended by Abraham Lincoln, we read the following. He then went on and depicted the career of the Father Chiniquy, how he had been unjustly persecuted, and in conclusion said, 'As long as God gives me a heart to feel, a brain to think, or a hand to execute my will, I shall devote it against the power which has attempted to use the machinery of the courts to destroy the rights and character of an American citizen.' And this promise made by Abraham Lincoln in his maturer years, he also kept." That was by Burke McCarthy. Lincoln realized that Chiniquy had been unjustly accused. The night before Chiniquy was to be condemned to prison for a crime he did not commit, an eyewitness who had overheard the plot to destroy Chiniquy came forward and he was saved. Abraham Lincoln made a lot of enemies as a result of the Chiniquy trial. As they left the courtroom, Charles Chiniquy was in tears. Abraham Lincoln asked him, "Father Chiniquy, what are you crying for?" "Dear Mr. Lincoln," I answered. This is Chiniquy now. "Allow me to tell you the joy I should naturally feel for such a victory is destroyed in my mind by the fear of what it may cost you. There were in the court no less than 10 or 12 Jesuits from Chicago and St. Louis who came to hear my sentence of condemnation to the penitentiary. What troubles my soul just now and draws my tears is that it seems to me that I have read your sentence of death in their fiendish eyes. How many other noble victims have already fallen at their feet?" That's 50 Years in the Church of Rome, page 280 to 281. Abraham Lincoln, as far back as 1855 and 1856, was already a marked man that Rome sought to destroy. 4 years later, in 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected President of the United States. As he made his way from Illinois to Washington, D.C., he had to pass through the city of Baltimore. Remember, which was the original Catholic headquarters in America. He later said to Charles Chiniquy, "I am so glad to meet you again. You see that your friends, the Jesuits, have not yet killed me. But they would have surely done it when I passed through their most beloved city, Baltimore. Had I not passed by incognito a few hours before, they expected me. We have proof that the company which had been selected and organized to murder me was led by a rabid Roman Catholic called Byrne, and it was almost entirely composed of Roman Catholics. More than that, there were 2 disguised priests among them to lead and encourage them. I saw Mr. Morse, the learned inventor of the electric telegraphy. He told me that when he was in Rome not long ago, he found out the proofs of the most formidable conspiracy against this country and all its institutions. It is evident that it is to the intrigues and emissaries of the Pope that we owe in great part the horrible civil war, which is threatening to cover the country with blood and ruins. I'm sorry that Professor Morse had to leave Rome before he could know more about the secret plans of the Jesuits against the liberties and the very existence of this country." And of course, we read one of the quotes from Samuel Morse, if you recall, a couple ages back here. 20 men had been hired in Baltimore to assassinate the president-elect on his way to Washington. The leader of this band was an Italian refugee, a barber well known in Baltimore. Their plan was as follows. When Mr. Lincoln arrived in that city, the assassins were to mix with the crowd and get as near his person as possible and shoot at him with their pistols. If he was in a carriage, hand grenades had been prepared, filled with detonating power such as Orsini used in attempting to assassinate Louis Napoleon. Orsini is one of the papal families, by the way. These were to be thrown into the carriage, and to make the work of death doubly sure, pistols were to be discharged into the vehicle at the same moment. The assassins had a vessel lying ready to receive them in the harbor. From hence, they would be carried to Mobile and the seceded state of Alabama. An Italian barber well known in Baltimore, a Romanist, was to have stabbed him while seated in the carriage when he started from the depot. So they had this really planned out, but it didn't work because he came earlier, incognito. Fortunately, the plot of the Jesuits to kill Lincoln failed, as they sought to take Lincoln's life before he ever reached the White House. While riding on the train, John Wilkes Booth dropped a letter written to him by Charles Selby. Shortly after, the letter was found and delivered to President Lincoln, who, after having read it, wrote the word assassination across it and filed it in his office, where it was found after his death and was placed in evidence as a court exhibit. Here is an excerpt from the letter. Quote, "Abe must die, and now. You can choose your weapons, the cup, the knife, the bullet. The cup failed us once and might again. You know where to find your friends. Your disguises are so perfect and complete. Strike for your home, strike for your country. Bide your time, but strike sure." This letter was used to help convict Mrs. Mary E. Surratt and some of the other conspirators in the trial of the Lincoln assassination. They wanted to stab him. If that failed, they were to shoot him and blow him up. Those failed, so they tried to poison him. They were the emissaries of the Pope, the Jesuits. John Smith Dye, who was a witness to these events, tells us the following. "It was a dark day in our country's history when an armed guard had to surround the Hotel Willard's, where the chief magistrate had taken temporary lodging to prevent his assassination. And on that day, March 4th, 1861, of his inauguration, he was escorted up Pennsylvania Avenue in a hollow square of cavalry, and the utmost vigilance was exercised by General Scott to prevent his being publicly assassinated on the way to the Capitol to deliver his inaugural address from the East Portico. These were terrible times." John Smith, The Adder's Den. "When you remember the Council of Vienna, Metternich, the Pope, and the Jesuit orders planned to kill and destroy this country, to destroy its freedom, to destroy Protestantism, and to kill presidents, what does that tell you about the evil, vicious, malicious character of the Jesuits? When you remember their attempts on Andrew Jackson's life, the assassination of William Henry Harrison, the assassination of Zachary Taylor, the attempted assassination of James Buchanan, the attempted assassination of Abraham Lincoln, and then finally his assassination, what does that tell you about the Roman Catholic Church? It shows you their facade of being a church is just that, a facade. They hide behind a religious mask so that they will not be suspected of the many abominations they continually perpetrate in this country and around the world. May God help us to never have anything to do with this satanic organization." Synagogue of Satan. Abraham Lincoln stated, "So many plots have already been made against my life that it is a real miracle that they have all failed, when we consider that the great majority of them were in the hands of the skillful Roman Catholic murderers, evidently trained by the Jesuits. But can we expect that God will make a perpetual miracle to save my life? I believe not. The Jesuits are so expert in those deeds of blood that Henry IV said it was impossible to escape them, and he became their victim, though he did all that he could to be done to protect himself. My escape from their hands since the letter of the Pope to Jeff Davis has sharpened the millions of daggers to pierce my breast would be more than a miracle. But just as the Lord heard no murmur from the lips of Moses when he told him that he had to die before crossing the Jordan for the sins of his people, so I hope and pray that he will hear no murmur from me when I fall for my nation's sake. The only two favors I ask of the Lord are, first, that I may die for the sacred cause in which I am engaged, and that I am the standard bearer of the rights and liberties of my country. The second favor I ask of God is that my dear son Robert, when I am gone, will be one of those who lift up that flag of liberty, which will cover my tomb, and will carry it with honor and fidelity to the end of his life. And as his father did, surrounded by the millions who will be called with him to fight and die for the defense and honor of our country. You'll see what Abraham's tomb looks like today. Abraham Lincoln understood that his time was very near. In the midst of unparalleled successes, while all the bells of the land were ringing with joy, a calamity fell upon us which overwhelmed the country in consternation and awe. On Friday evening, April 14th, President Lincoln attended Ford's Theater in Washington. He was sitting quietly in his box listening to the drama when a man entered the door of the lobby leading to the box. Closing the door behind him, drawing near to the president, he drew from his pocket a small pistol and shot him in the back of the head. As the president fell, senseless and mortally wounded, and the shriek of his wife, who was seated at his side, pierced every ear, the assassin leaped from the box, a perpendicular height of 9 feet, as he rushed across the stage, bareheaded, brandished a dagger, exclaiming, "Sic semper tyrannus," and disappeared behind the side of the scenes. Noble Abraham, true descendant of the father of the faithful, honest in every trust, humble as a child, tender-hearted as a woman, who could not bear to injure even his most envenomed foes, who in the hour of triumph was saddened lest the feelings of his adversaries should be wounded by their defeat, with charity of all, malice towards none, endowed with common sense, intelligence never surpassed, with the power of intellect which enabled him to grapple with the most gigantic opponents in debate, developing abilities as a statesman, which won the gratitude of his country and the admiration of the world, and with graces and amiability which drew him all generous hearts, dies by the bullet of an assassin. But who was that assassin? Booth was nothing but the tool of the Jesuits. It was Rome who directed his arm, after corrupting his heart and damaging his soul. And after 20 years of constant and most difficult researches, I come fearlessly today before the American people to say and prove that the President Abraham Lincoln was assassinated by the priests and Jesuits of Rome. In the book of the testimonies given in the prosecution of the assassination of Lincoln, published by Ben Pittman, and in the 2 volumes of the trial of John Surratt in 1867, we have the legal and irrefutable proof that the plot of the assassins of Lincoln was matured, if not started, in the house of Mary Surratt, 561 H Street, Washington, D.C. The sworn testimonies showed that it was the common rendezvous of the priests of Washington. What does the presence of so many priests in that house reveal to the world? No man of common sense who knows anything but about the priests of Rome can doubt that they were the advisors, the counselors, the very soul of the infernal plot. Those priests who were the personal friends and the father confessors of Booth, John Surratt, Mrs. and Miss Surratt, could not be constantly there without knowing what was going on, particularly when we know that every one of those priests was a rebel, rabid in heart. Every one of those priests, knowing that his infallible Pope had called Jeff Davis his dear son and had taken the Southern Confederacy under his protection, was bound to believe that the most holy thing a man could do was to fight for the Southern cause by destroying those who were its enemies. Read the history of the assassination of Admiral Coligny, Henry III, Henry IV, William of Taciturn, by the hired assassinations of the Jesuits. Compare them with the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, and you will find that one resembles the other like 2 drops of water. You will understand that they all come from the same source. Just like Abraham Lincoln mentioned Henry IV. It's all the same people, folks. The arch-rebel Jeff Davis could give the money, but the Jesuits alone could select the assassins, train them, and show them a crown of glory in heaven, if they would kill the author of the bloodshed, the famous renegade and apostate, the enemy of the Pope and the Church, Abraham Lincoln. Who does not see the lessons given by the Jesuits to Booth in their daily intercourse in Mary Surratt's house when he reads those lines written by Booth a few hours before his death? Quote, "I can never repent. God made me the instrument of his punishment." Compare these words with the doctrines and principles taught by the councils, the decrees of the Pope, the laws of the Holy Inquisition, and you will find the sentiments and belief of Booth flow from these principles as the rivers flows from its source. Exactly. We looked at the Secreta Monita, we looked at the Sacrosancta Concilia, we looked at all of these documents, and they all testify to the same spirit. And that pious Miss Surratt, who the very next day after the murder of Lincoln said, without being rebuked in the presence of several witnesses, quote, "The death of Abraham Lincoln is no more than the death of any N-word in the army." Where did she get the maxim, if not from her church? Had not that church recently proclaimed through the devoted Roman Catholic Judge Taney in his Dred Scott decision that Negroes have no right, which the white is bound to respect? By bringing the president on a level with the lowest N-word, Rome was saying that he had no right even to his life. Right after Lincoln's death, John Surratt, who was part of the assassination conspiracy, fled to Montreal. From Montreal, he was taken to Liverpool, England, and then to Rome. When a United States official finally caught up with him, he was found in the Pope's personal army. A conspirator in the assassination of Abraham Lincoln was a member of the Pope's personal army. 3 or 4 hours before Lincoln was murdered in Washington on 14th of April, 1865, that murder was not only known by someone, but it was circulated and talked of in the streets and the houses of the priestly and Romish town of St. Joseph, Minnesota. The fact is undeniable. The testimonies are unchallengeable, and there were no railroad nor any telegraph communications nearer than 40 or 80 miles from St. Joseph. Mr. Linneman, who is a Roman Catholic, tells us that though he heard this from many in his store and in the streets, he does not remember the name of a single one who told him that. But if the memory of Mr. Linneman is so deficient on that subject, we can help him and tell him that what was said with mathematical accuracy. The priests of St. Joseph were often visiting Washington and boarding, probably at Mrs. Surratt's place. Those priests of Washington were in daily communication with their co-rebel priests of St. Joseph. They were their intimate friends. There was no secret among them. The details of the murder, as the day selected for its commission, were as well known among the priests of St. Joseph as they were among those of Washington. How could the priests conceal such a joyful event from their bosom friend, Mr. Linneman? He was their confidential man. He was their purveyor. He was their right-hand man among the faithful of St. Joseph. The priests of Rome knew and circulated the death of Lincoln 4 hours before its occurrence in their Roman Catholic town of St. Joseph, Minnesota. There is so much more material. In the trial of John Surratt, a French minister by the name of Rufus King stated the following, quote, I believe that he, John Surratt, is protected by the clergy and that the murder is the result of a deep-laid plot, not only against the life of President Lincoln, but against the existence of this republic, as we are aware that the priesthood and royalty are and always have been opposed to liberty. 4 people were tried, convicted, and executed by hanging for the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. Their names were Davy Harold, Lewis Payne, George Atzerodt, and Mary E. Surratt. They were all Roman Catholics. That information is in Ford's Theater, and several glass cases showing many things about Lincoln, the Civil War, and his assassination. As Abraham Lincoln was being assassinated, an attempt was also made to assassinate William Seward, the Secretary of State. There was also an attempt on the life of Ulysses S. Grant, but Grant had to take an emergency trip to New Jersey to be at the bedside of a dying relative. Andrew Johnson, the Vice President of the United States, was also to be assassinated at this time. The man who was to kill him became scared and ran off, riding on a horse into the country, and did not carry out the part of the plan. Lewis Payne, known as the Florida Boy, an athletic young giant who some months before had joined the conspiracy, rode up to the front of the residence of the Secretary of State, William Seward. William Seward had been ill for 3 weeks, suffering from a fractured jaw. The result of the running away of his team was under the constant care of male nurses. Payne rang the doorbell, and it was answered by the colored butler. He told the latter that he had been sent with some medicine which he must take to the sick room. The butler refused to allow him to enter, saying that he had orders to allow no one to Mr. Seward's room. The stranger, Lewis Payne, after a short struggle, knocked him down and went bounding up the stairs. He rushed into the sick chamber after felling each of the 2 sons of the secretary. He, Lewis Payne, then sprang up the sick man and seriously stabbed him 3 times. By a superhuman effort, the latter struggled out of the bed with his assailant, who left him in a heap on the floor, bleeding from the wounds he had inflicted. After his murderous assault on Seward, the ruffian rushed down the stairs, yelling at the top of his voice, I am mad, and he very probably was. He was entirely under the control of the hypnotic influences of the wicked people in whose power he had allowed himself to be. Remember, the Jesuits used more black magic than anybody ever? Nothing new under the sun, folks, just like how they do trauma-based mind control people today with all the shootings and all the crazy things that are happening. They've been doing it for a long time. It was part of the plan that Michael O'Laughlin, one of the conspirators from Baltimore, was to have murdered General Grant that night. This was not possible owing to the change in the general's plans. To Atzerodt, it fell to assassinate Vice President Johnson, but he became frightened. It fell to assassinate Johnson, but he became frightened and spent the day riding into the country on a horse. He was found several days after with relatives of his below Washington. He made a written confession before he was executed, which confirmed the presence of Surratt in Washington that fatal day, a fact which 9 reputable witnesses had sworn to. So this is all documented, folks, and of course you're never going to learn about this in the mainstream narrative, but this is the truth. Thus, we have a conspiracy to kill not only the president, but to bring the government of the United States completely into chaos. Do we not see the fulfillment of the Council of Vienna and Verona at work in 1865? Do we not see the hand of the Jesuit order and the Roman Catholic Church to destroy this great country? It was an awful time in the history of the United States. Now, if you know also the history of England, it's the same thing when they tried to do the gunpowder plot and all the crazy things there, the back and forth. It's nothing new under the sun. We have already seen that the Roman Catholic Church sowed the seeds of division between the two great sections of this country, dividing north from south on the burning question of slavery. That division was, this is by Charles Chiniquy now, that division was her golden opportunity to crush one by the other and reign over the bloody ruins of both. A favored long-standing policy. She hoped that the hour of her supreme triumph over this continent has come. She, this is Roman Catholic Church, ordered the Emperor of France to be ready with an army in Mexico ready to support the South, and she bade all the Roman Catholics to enroll themselves under the banners of slavery by joining themselves to the Democratic Party. Abraham Lincoln said to Charles Chiniquy, "I will forever be grateful for the warnings you have addressed to me about the dangers ahead to my life from Rome. I know they are not imaginary dangers. If I were fighting against a Protestant South as a nation, there would be no danger of assassination. The nations who read the Bible fight bravely on the battlefield, but they do not assassinate their enemies. The Pope and the Jesuits, with their infernal inquisition, are the only organized powers in the world which have recourse to the dagger of the assassin to murder those who they can convince with arguments or conquer with the sword. Unfortunately, I feel more and more every day that it is not against the Americans of the South alone that I am fighting. It is more against the Pope of Rome, his perfidious Jesuits, and their blind and bloodthirsty slaves. As long as they hope to conquer the North, they will spare me. But the day we rout their enemies, take their cities, and force them to submit, then it is my impression that the Jesuits, who are the principal rulers of the South, will do what they have almost invariably done in the past. The dagger or the pistol will do what the strong hands of the warriors could not achieve. This civil war seems to be nothing but a political affair to those who do not see, as I do, the secret springs of that terrible drama. But it is more a religious than a civil war. It is Rome who wants to rule and degrade the North, as she has ruled and degraded the South, from the very day of its discovery. There are only few of the Southern leaders who are not more or less under the influence of the Jesuits through their wives, family relations, and their friends. Several members of the family of Davis belong to the Church of Rome. But it is very certain that if the American people could learn what I know of the fierce hatred of the priests of Rome against our institutions, our schools, our most sacred rights, and our so dearly bought liberties, they would drive them away tomorrow from among us, or they would shoot them as traitors. But you are the only one to whom I reveal these sad secrets, for I know that you learned them before me. The history of these last 1,000 years tells us that the wearer of the Catholic Church is not a dagger to pierce the bosom of a free nation. She is a stone to her neck, to paralyze her, to prevent her advance in the ways of civilization, science, intelligence, happiness, and liberty. Lincoln said also, this war would have never been possible without the sinister influence of the Jesuits. We owe it to popery that we now see our land reddened with the blood of her noblest sons. I pity the priests, the bishops, and the monks of Rome in the United States when the people realize that they are in great part responsible for the tears and the bloodshed in this war. You are perfectly correct when you say that it was to detach the Roman Catholics who have enrolled themselves in our army. Since the publication of that Pope's letter, a great number of them have deserted their banners and turned traitors. It is also true that Meade has remained with us and gained the bloody battle of Gettysburg. But how could he lose it when he was surrounded by such heroes as Howard, Reynolds, Bufford, Wadsworth, Cutler, Slocum, Sickles, Hancock, and Barnes? But it is evident that his Romanism superseded his patriotism after the battle. He let the army of Lee escape when he could easily have cut his retreat and forced him to surrender after losing nearly half of his soldiers in the last 3 days. Yeah, really quick pause. There's so much of the Civil War. Freemasonry on both sides, Synagogue of Satan, basically staged conflicts. Of course, they weren't staged in the sense like a lot of people died, but there were a lot of suspicious things that happened, which one of them is being described to you here, where he basically lets Lee get away when he could have just routed him and taken over, because there were Freemasons, secret society, operatives, Jesuits on both sides of the Civil War. Look at all the pictures of old people of the Civil War. They all have the same thing as like communist revolutions, hand in the coat, swearing allegiance to the papal power through secret societies and so on. Moving on. When Meade was to order the pursuit after the battle, a stranger came in haste to the headquarters, and that stranger was a disguised Jesuit. After 10 minutes conversing with him, Meade made such arrangements for the pursuit of the enemy that he escaped almost untouched with the loss of only 2 guns. Lincoln also said, the common people see and hear the big noisy wheels of the Southern Confederacy's cars. They call them Jeff Davis, Lee, Toombs, Beauregard, Semmes, etc. And they honestly think that they are the motive power, the first cause of our troubles. But this is a mistake. The true motive power is secreted behind the thick walls of the Vatican, the colleges and schools of the Jesuits, the convents of the nuns, and the confessional boxes of Rome. This is Abraham Lincoln telling you exactly what we've been talking about in the last however many hours of this. Same stuff. Final paragraph. In fulfilling the councils of Vienna, Verona, and Chieri, the Catholic Church divided the North and South to their agent, John C. Calhoun. They sought to destroy the economy through Nicholas Biddle, and they used the poison cup and the assassin's bullet to assassinate and to attempt to assassinate a total of 5 presidents within a span of 25 years. They reddened American soil with the blood of thousands of American young men in this terrible civil war. Oh, that we had eyes to see that Rome never changes. What she did, she is still doing today. May God help us to understand the evil of the Roman papacy then and now. Very important text. Now, there's a couple more that I want to show you. This is, this is a couple things with Abraham Lincoln. This one is the secret symbol of the Lincoln Memorial. Remember I told you, let's take a look and see what Lincoln's tomb looks like now. Here he is. Here's the tomb of Lincoln. And of course, if you look close enough, he's sitting on a throne with Roman fasci. So if you know all of the backstory I just gave you, and then you see this Roman symbolism immortalizing Lincoln, the final president to basically fight the Jesuits, immortalizing him as sitting on a Roman throne, as in being subjugated. This is the beast's way of telling you who's boss. Putting Lincoln on a chair that's a Roman chair. And everybody's like, oh, it's a Lincoln Memorial, but they don't realize what's actually hidden in that memorial. What's the message? What is the many miss the true meaning of the memorial communicated by a symbol. The symbol is not some hidden detail, but instead is deceptively obvious, repeated again in plain sight. What is the symbol? Recognized around the world as a symbol of the United States and one of the great presidents, the awe-inspiring Lincoln Memorial attracts millions of visitors every year. In the main chamber of the memorial, some of these visitors lean against the back wall, crane their necks, and contort their faces, looking for a face in the rear of Lincoln's head. Some will attempt to decode Lincoln's hands, looking for some deeper meaning, convinced that it must be here in this exalted chamber. Most of these visitors will end up shaking their heads, shrugging, and walking away, unconvinced of what they have seen. The irony is that the deeper meaning surrounds them and has probably gone overlooked. While distracted by myths about faces and hair and letter signing hands, many visitors miss the true meaning of the memorial and the ubiquitous symbol that carries that meaning. Instead of being hidden somewhere inaccessible, the symbol is deceptively obvious, right there under Abraham Lincoln's hands. This symbol is so overlooked that even when pointed out, many observers will not recognize it. That's exactly the point. The symbol is that of the fasces, a bundle of rods bound by a leather thong. Repeated throughout the memorial, the fasces reveal the higher meaning of the Lincoln Memorial and the way the memorial's designers meant to honor Abraham Lincoln. Oh, they're honoring him. They're not honoring actual Lincoln. They're honoring the papal authority and the Jesuits' victory over Abraham Lincoln. What do the fasces represent? In ancient times, fasces were a Roman symbol of a power and authority, a bundle of wooden rods and an axe bound together by leather thongs. Fasces represented that a man had imperium, or executive authority, i.e. power over life and death. Does that sound to you like something familiar? Exercising imperium, a Roman leader could expect his orders to be obeyed, could dole out punishment, and could even execute those who disobeyed. Sound familiar? The fasces he carried symbolized his power in 2 ways. The rod suggested punishment by beating, the axe suggested beheading. On its surface, the fasces imply power, strength, authority, and justice. You will sit, Abraham Lincoln, and you will obey the Roman power. Though you try to stick your nose out, the end shows you who's boss. This is what this represents. Of course, you have these all over the U.S. government, and you have them in seals and sigils and in various buildings. And even the French Revolution we've talked about this in the French Revolution episode. So what does this tell you? What does this tell you? It tells you who the real people in control here are. Now, this is an interesting video that kind of talks about the thing we just read from Bill Hughes. This is by, I forget who it's by, but the interview here is really
Talk
good.
about Lincoln for a minute, because the typical view is, well, Lincoln was trying to fight slavery and it was just against the South, and that was it. But that's not necessarily, you bring up other historical elements of how the Catholic Church was absolutely involved in supporting the South against the North with the desire to break up or to cause weakness in the Union and really to break it up, right? I mean,
right. Yeah, it's not that the Confederacy was a Catholic movement. I wouldn't say that, but there were many Catholics that were involved, and politically, the Vatican supported the Southern Confederacy. So the Pope was the only world leader that wrote a letter of acknowledgement of Jefferson Davis as the president of the new,
separate country. Basically.
Exactly, basically a separate country. And that was a big deal, a very, very big deal. But it was known that the Vatican was supporting the Confederacy. You had people like Jefferson Davis. Jefferson Davis had been educated by Dominican priests. He had advisors who were Catholic priests. The first chaplain of the Confederacy was a Jesuit. He had people like John Bannon, a Confederate priest, and then the Archbishop of New York, who
kind of a double agent, it seems like.
Yeah, he was a double agent. They called him Dagger John Hughes, Archbishop Hughes. And he was called Dagger John because he was a very tough guy. But he seemed to outwardly support Lincoln because he was based in New York. Yeah, he's in the North. But it was said by Chineke and others that he secretly was supporting the Confederacy politically. And it's the politics that, that matter. That's where the Vatican was supporting the Confederacy because they were hoping to break up the Union entirely and establish what they called a Roman Catholic Empire from Mexico through America all the way up into Canada. That was the plan, according to Chineke and then a Union general named General Thomas Maley Harris. He sat on the committee to investigate the assassination of Abraham Lincoln and came to the conclusion that the Vatican and the Jesuits were the ones who had trained John Wilkes Booth and the other conspirators to kill Lincoln. And he wrote a book years later called Rome's Responsibility for the Assassination of Abraham Lincoln. I mean, all of this is documented. It's been brushed under the carpet for some reason. Obviously, there are certain people who don't want us to know about this. But the evidence was so overwhelming that the United States government, after the Civil War, broke off diplomatic relations with the Vatican for more than 100 years.
So, I mean, just say that again. I mean, say that again, really, people, that this isn't conspiracy. Oh, wow. The government, the United States government.
Yeah, the United States government, because the evidence that came out in court, and General Harris talks about this, because he sat there, he watched the witnesses come in, he saw all the evidence firsthand, and he's documenting it in his book. And he said there's just no question that this was a Vatican plot involving the Jesuits who were at Georgetown College, which became Georgetown University, which is their headquarters here in the United States, that this was a Romish plot to kill Lincoln, mainly because they were angry that Lincoln, one, because he opposed the Confederacy, but also because he refused to acknowledge this European emperor that they had set up down in Mexico. And this is a whole chapter of the Civil War most people don't know about, where there was what was called the European plot. There was the Monroe Doctrine. President James Monroe said to the European countries, don't try to colonize North America. Just stay out of North America. Because we had all these conflicts with the French, with the British, with Spain. You see what I'm saying? Over and over again. So they said, okay, we're a separate country now. This is the United States. Don't try to colonize here. Well, you had a plot involving Pope Pius IX, the Emperor Napoleon III of France, and then Maximilian I of Austria. So these three Catholic powers worked together to invade Mexico with a French army.
1862.
1862.
Mm-hmm.
And they invaded Mexico. And the idea was they were going to take control of Mexico and then go up and invade the southern United States and help the Confederacy defeat Lincoln. Not because they were pro-Confederacy, but because they wanted to break up the Union.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is why Lincoln was fighting so hard to preserve the Union. They talk about that today, that he preserved the Union, but the full historic context is not given. That there were these powers in Europe that wanted to establish this, and I'm quoting General Harris now, literally, he says they wanted to establish a Roman Catholic Empire from Mexico through Texas, California, all the way up to Canada.
Basically the West.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And so what Chineke says, and we talked about this earlier, what Chineke says...
Who's Chineke for people that don't know?
Charles Chineke was a Canadian Catholic priest who was the good friend of Abraham Lincoln. He had actually migrated into America with a congregation from Canada. He was the founder of St. Anne, Illinois. And he was actually a nationally recognized figure. He was well known. When he died, his obituary appeared on the front page of the New York Times.
Yeah, amazing. So this guy of stature, for sure. He was Catholic.
He was Catholic. He did convert and become Protestant later on. But he was the good friend of Abraham Lincoln. He had gotten into a conflict with the church leaders in the Catholic Church, and they dragged him into court through an agent of theirs named Peter Spink, and were accusing Chineke of different things. Well, long story short, Abraham Lincoln was a lawyer at that time, and he defended Chineke in court and won the case and had the charges thrown out and basically rescued Chineke from almost certain ruin. And so that's how they met each other and how they became friends. But this is years before Lincoln became president. So Chineke was a famous priest because in Canada, he had opposed alcoholism and stuff like that. And so everybody thought he was this very virtuous man. He was well-liked, well-loved by his congregation. But he encountered the corruption from Rome and believed that the hierarchy was angry at Lincoln for defending him. And he even warned Lincoln, because he said he saw Jesuits in the courtroom when the trial happened, and when the hierarchy was defeated, he said he saw a look on the face of the Jesuits that they were eventually going to kill Lincoln. That's what he believed. Mm-hmm. But of course, it didn't happen until years later when the Civil War happens. And so Chineke wrote two books. He wrote a book called 50 Years in the Church of Rome, where he describes his own journey, as a Catholic priest and all the experiences that he had, and then his relationship with Abraham Lincoln, and how he became the friend of Lincoln. But he met him repeatedly in the White House and warned him because he believed that the Jesuits were planning and plotting to kill him. Now, some people would think and have tried to argue that Chineke's claims were exaggerated, or maybe he, shouldn't be trusted, this kind of thing. Later historians after World War II made those kind of claims. The problem is, when you get to General Harris's book, who was a Union general, he was a doctor, he sat on the court, he actually confirmed most everything that Chineke had to say. And so their views of things, work together, and, one confirms the witness of the other. Mm-hmm. But then when you have the book in the 20th century by Emmett McLaughlin, which was called An Inquiry into the Assassination of Abraham Lincoln, McLaughlin was a Catholic priest, and he kept hearing these stories. This is happening in the 1960s. And McLaughlin kept hearing these stories about the assassination of Lincoln. And he said, could there be anything to this? So he started investigating, started going through the church records and so on. And he said he was just amazed at how much information he uncovered.
This is a report released by...
Oh, goodness. Where was that? Where was this thing? I'm wanting to see what the author of this, to give you the name. Oh, no. Okay. Let's see. This is Vatican Lincoln Connection by Chris Pinto, Prophecy Watchers. So anyway, that's who that was. So the more you learn about history, right? Here's one more article. This is Who Controls the United States of America by Daryl Eberhardt, April 13th, 2024. Who Controls the United States of America by Daryl Eberhardt. Some people say the Jews control the USA. However, my 11 years of research have shown me that agents of Papal Rome, Jesuits, Knight of Malta, Knights of Columbus, Jesuit-controlled high-level Freemasons, and various Jesuit temporal coadjutors have been controlling the United States for over a century. Is that true? Does that line up with everything we've looked at? Please carefully read and consider the following 3 quotations. Quote, we find that Roman Catholics, who comprise less than 1/6 of the population, have been dominating power in our political affairs, and of late years, i.e. since the early 20s, have headed almost every national, state, and municipal office from the president down to the dog catcher. During the Woodrow Wilson's administrations, 1913 and 1921, the Army, the Navy, the Treasury, the Secret Service, the Post Office, the Emergency Fleet, transports, printing, aircraft, and dozens of others were presided over by 4th-degree Knights of Columbus. That's Miss Burke McCarthy, the suppressed truth about the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. What Professor Carol Brown of the University of Massachusetts had learned from Carl Bernstein, the author of F. Tupper Saucy, had discovered for myself over several years of a private investigation, the papacy really does run the United States foreign policy. Yes, Carl Bernstein noted that the leading American players behind the Reagan-Vatican conspiracy to a man were devout Roman Catholics, namely William Casey, director of CIA, and a papal knight of Malta, according to author Eric John Phelps, Richard Allen, National Security Advisor, Judge William Clark, National Security Advisor, Alexander Haig, Secretary of State, and a papal knight of Malta, according to Eric Phelps, Vernon Walters, an ambassador at large, and William Wilson, ambassador to the Vatican State. But the reporter neglected to mention that the entire Senate Foreign Relations Committee was governed by Roman Catholics as well, specifically Senators Joseph Biden, Subcommittee on European Affairs, and who is now Vice President of the United States. Of course, this was a little bit older. Paul Sarbanes, International Economic Security Policy, Trade, Oceans, Environment, Daniel P. Moynihan, Near Eastern and Southern Asian Affairs, John Kerry, Terrorism, Narcotics, and International Communications, and Christopher Dodd, Western Hemisphere and Peace Corps. That's by Tupper Saucy. In fact, when the Holy Alliance story hit the stands in 1992, there was virtually no arena of federal legislative activity, according to the 1992 World Almanac of U.S. Politics, that was not directly controlled by a Roman Catholic senator or representative. Vatican Council, the Second Vatican Council's Constitution on the Church, 1964, instructs Roman Catholic politicians to use their secular offices to advance the cause of Roman Catholicism. Empire within an empire. It is not Zionist or Khazarian Jews or Israel or Jewish neoconservatives who have been or are running the United States, as some folks allege. Rather, agents of Papal Rome have been running the United States for over a century. Yes, they do occasionally place a papal court Jew in a prominent position, i.e. the head of the Federal Reserve, to give the New World Order conspiracy a Jewish flavor. However, Papal Rome is the real controller of the United States, and she rules the United States from behind the scenes. Now, is all of that true based on everything we've looked at? I would say so, and hopefully you would agree. Charles Chiniquy wrote a lot about the Jesuits. You can look into him. He's an ex-Catholic priest, like a lot of other ones in history, like Alberto Rivera, and I forget the other one with the M. Maybe I'll think of it. But anyway, there's several people who have been drawn out of Babylon, that were in Babylon, and realized the evils of Babylon and testified against it. The Jesuits fomented the Civil War and used the Freemason connection and secret societies, Knights of Columbus, all these orders on both sides to force America into bankruptcy. That's what you need to realize. The Civil War did not just happen. It wasn't just because people disagreed about slavery. You saw a persistent push and push and push to get people to fight and to create an issue out of something and to create ultimately a war so that America could be subjugated. The Civil War led to many important developments. It was the inflection point in America's history and destiny to become the false prophet. In 1866, you had the 14th Amendment, which basically created citizenship for people on a federal level, not just state. In 1871, you had the Act of 1871, which created the Corporation of the United States in Washington, D.C., which, of course, the government is now. It's a corporation of the United States. And of course, the Rothschilds lent that corporation lots of money and bought America over through it. 50 years after that, you had basically the Titanic conspiracy. There's a whole lot. He has a whole chapter on that. I wasn't going to bother reading it because it really doesn't matter. The point is to understand the inflection point. The Titanic isn't the actual Titanic. I think it was the Oceanic or whatever, but it was the other ship. They basically did a massive insurance fraud on this boat, while at the same time killing all of the people who were opposed to the passing of the Federal Reserve. All of the wealthier people who were opposed to the Federal Reserve, who were opposed to JP Morgan Chase and Rockefeller. There were other wealthy people. All of those people were on the Titanic. And the Titanic was sunk because it killed those people. It killed all opposition. And the Federal Reserve, of course, was passed in the middle of the night. And the Federal Reserve was created. The central bank was finally in the United States. And the rest, as they say, is history. World War II, communism, JFK, Cuban Missile Crisis, Vietnam, countless revolutions, 9/11, so on and so forth. It's all been the same Synagogue of Satan trickery, folks. And now that you have a basis in history, you can see that these things always have some connection to Rome. There's not enough time in the day to document all of these things. There really isn't. And like I said, you can get lost. You could spend years and years of your life tracing all of the evil things that Satan has done through history. The point is to understand their source. And the Bible tells you, without having to get into any conspiracy theories. In the church age, the Roman Catholic Church is the seat of Satan. So everything is related to the Roman Catholic Church ultimately taking complete and total power over the world. That means that all of these revolutions, all these wars, all these intrigues are tied to that outcome. Even if you don't know what actually happened, guaranteed if you research, you will find a road that links that situation to Rome. So you can go read about these things on your own. Bill Hughes, The Secret Terrorist, all these books that I've cited to you, all these various authors like Tupper Saucy, Edmund Paris, or Eric Paris, was it Eric Paris? Edmund Paris, Eric von Phelps, I think was the other one. A lot of different authors with a lot of great history and documentation. The point is this: America has been owned by the beast for a very long time. We are now 200 years, almost 250, 170 years after the Civil War. We have been owned by the Jesuits for a long time, doing the beast's bidding through false signs and wonders, basically using its temporal power. America was the world power, and it basically exercises all the power of the first beast. Therefore, that there's a military component to this, alongside the false signs and wonders. Just like you saw with Russia and other European monarchs in history, what happens? Same formula. They assassinate the leaders, foment revolutions, create political instability, take over the finances, shape the culture, and so on and so forth. America does not have a unique history in that regard. It really doesn't. America's history is just like everybody else. It's a victim of the Jesuit art of war. However, it is important to know that history, because a lot of people think today that America is this free country and it's the bastion, it's the light of the world, when really it's the bastion of Rome, and it's going to be in charge of resurrecting Rome back into the world. If you know this history, and I haven't even scratched the surface of all the crazy stuff that's happened, because we haven't talked about things after the Civil War, with all the things that have happened in history. Again, you could spend your whole life on this. But if you know this history, just what I've covered today for you, ask yourself the million-dollar question. Do you really think that Trump would have gotten so lucky with his quote-unquote assassination attempt? Do you really think so, folks? Do you really think if Trump was truly against the establishment, like Monroe, like Buchanan, like Jefferson, like Adams, like all of these people who got killed or attempted to be killed, if he was truly against the establishment, he wouldn't have even made it to office. He wouldn't have even made it day one. Trump is not against the establishment. Trump is very much part of the establishment. The illusion is that he's coming to rescue you from the establishment. And of course, that's a Jesuit trick. With everything that you know about all of the intrigues that have happened, not only in America, but in Europe, there is no such thing as something that, the bullet accidentally missed. And he had this miraculous recovery in 7 days. And he had the perfect photo op. And, perfect timing right before the Republican National Convention. And, now the Jews think he's anointed by God because in the Old Testament it says that, if your right ear is pierced and so on and so forth. there's ties they're making there with a messianic prophecy. And the evangelicals believe he's anointed by God because God protected him from the evil deep state trying to get him. Who's the real deep state, folks? Who is the real deep state? It's the Synagogue of Satan. But that deep state isn't coming down. Jesus is going to be the one that brings it down. But that deep state isn't getting voted out. That deep state isn't getting, great awakening out. You're not going to be aware of that. Most people are going to be deceived by the real deep state because they're going to marvel after the beast. So, you have to know your history. Anyone who knows all of these things that I've plainly related to you, combined with all the things that basically I've talked about in this entire presentation about the art of war and their various schemes, you can put one and one together and realize that this has been one of the biggest shams of the last 4 years. Trump coming to power is necessary for the image of the beast to be developed. They had to push people over the edge and build this cult of personality by making Trump seem that he is the favored instrument of God to come and bring salvation to everybody. The Jews, the Catholics, the Protestants, everybody's around Trump. But again, Trump is not the Pope. So what does that mean? That means that he is a Judas goat designed to unify all these people. Protestants, Catholics, Jews, pagans around the world, all coming together in this MAGA golden age idea. And when that's complete, the attention he's going to give is next. He's going to give it to the next Pope. His vice president is Catholic. Now, Trump is 78 or something like that. So he's not going to be around like for another 10 years, maybe. Maybe he will, who knows? But my feeling is that the next president is not going to be a Trump. Do you get it? The next president is not going to be Trump. Because right now, you have to understand how all this ties into the Bible prophecy. This is what people don't understand. Trump is not the Antichrist. There is no personal Antichrist. If anything is Antichrist, it's the Pope. But the Bible warns you of an institutional Antichrist, manifested through a personal power, which is the Pope. It's the papacy. Of course, we know, and you'll see other things when we talk about Satan's government really quick, but the point is the Pope is the visible expression of Satan on earth, and he will receive worship through that. So all of this ties into that particular outcome. Now, put yourself in kind of a critical thinking mode here. Trump right now has the whole world's admiration. He is, very loved by the world. You don't have room for two lights in the sky at the same time, right? It's either the sun or the moon, okay? You don't have room for both of these lights to just be there and shining. So the point is this: Trump is being marveled at, but he's not the final boss. That means that something has to happen. That means that his role is to train people and condition people and get them ready to marvel for the Pope. Because you're not going to have people marveling after the beast and also marveling after Trump at the same time. You can't do that. Satan needs attention in one place. And we know Trump is not the Pope, and I doubt that he will be made Pope. That would be crazy. But nevertheless, his job is to bring people to the Pope. What does that mean? Well, logical deduction is that the next president after Trump is going to be a totally different kind of president. He's not going to be a cult of personality kind of president. He'll be clean cut. He'll do exactly what he's told, but he's not going to be a cult of personality moment because it's going to be time for the new Pope, the conservative Pope, maybe an American Pope, maybe Vigano, to receive the light of the world. Do you understand? And now if you look at what vice president we have a servile puppet Catholic. J.D. Vance converted to Catholicism, and now suddenly everything's going great for him. He's a puppet. He's bought. If he becomes president, he'll be clean cut. He'll do it as he's told, and he'll pass the baton, all of that effort that Trump built, to the papal power. Do you understand how this works? So Trump is just an intermediary to the final step. But nevertheless, again, if they wanted Trump to be out, he would have been out a long time ago. Trump is the establishment. You have to know that. Now, America has a very important role to bring about the image of the beast. An image, again, is a representation. It's a copy of something. What was the beast? The beast was a religio-political power for over 1,000 years, where the papal institution was controlling the world, the civilized world at that time, the known world, the Western world, through its various nation states. One god king in a palace controlling a federation of states. That is the model that they want to bring the entire world under. And the Bible says it will be successful. The Roman power will be successful through the image of the beast. And it is the false prophet, the United States, who works all these deceptions and wonders like the MAGA movement to deceive people into bringing that government to the world again and enslaving themselves to the Pope. Right now, the whole world is switching from dark to light. I've covered this quite a bit in my various newscasts. It's going from liberal to conservative, nationalism, the return of religion. People are swinging into the right. They're exposing the deep state. People think we've conquered the globalists. We're pushing them out, guys. Yeah, the globalists that have control over the world, you managed to vote them out. The people just made a decision and sovereignly chose to vote them out. It's just total delusion. Trump is being propped up as a hero, obviously. And of course, all of this is to unite the political first through nationalism and through a certain way of doing business to get everybody on the nationalistic side. And then when that's there, the culture is ready for the spiritual layer of the cake. Do you get it? Trump's role is secular. Even though he's very religious, his role is really to bring the nuts and bolts of the nationalistic system in place for the whole world. And to set up religious kind of thinking. But really, once that's done, the people will be very easily ready to worship the beast. So he has a very important role. MAGA is modern fascism. And of course, fascism comes from what? From fasci, from the Roman fasci. He is having a cult of personality. And of course, when the image is done, all of that's going to be transferred over to Rome and the Roman pontiff. Sounds crazy, folks, but look, the Bible told you 2,000 years ago, and history confirms it everywhere you look. Right now, the current pope is a destroyer. First time the Jesuits ever held the papal office, which is a massive intrigue in the Catholic Church. But of course, that's by design. That's by design because his role is to liberalize everything, to destroy it, to be the antithesis, so that there's a revival, a synthesis, and a return to tradition. He is the scapegoat that everybody's calling the Antichrist, so that the next one can come and save it and be the savior. It's really, really profound. The next pope will probably be like Pope Benedict, not in the sense, Pope Benedict was like a necromancer. I mean, he was just, decrepit. But in terms of his values, he'll be very conservative, very pro-tradition. He's going to have a lot of energy. That's why I said Vigano to me is a great candidate. I'm not saying he will be the pope, but so far, he's the only one that's sticking out to me that's like a perfect candidate. Vigano is sharp. He's very well spoken. He's exposing to you the dangers of the deep church. He's a very, passionate person. He's a leader. He's a perfect candidate in my mind. So we'll have to watch and see what the next one, but either way, the next pope has to be conservative. Do you get it? He has to be conservative. He has to be conservative. He has to be very hardline traditionalist. He's going to be well spoken. He's going to be like Trump. Trump is training people to have an idolatry of a person. Do you get it? The Bible warns you that the world will marvel after the papal institution at the end. They're going to idolize this man and everything that he says. They're going to froth at the mouth. So what's Trump doing? Trump is training people to think that way and getting them involved in this spell of seduction. Trump is the biggest Judas goat in history because he's bringing the entire world to this final outcome. Anyway, by 2028, you're going to see the Olympics in the United States. So what does that tell me? Personally, it tells me that this is a marker where they're going to use to export the image to the rest of the world. I think it's a very reasonable time marker to say, okay, the world is going to be watching the United States in 2028. And LA is very bad right now. But of course, it needs to go through a resurrection. California is very liberal. It's gotten very destroyed because of that. And that's on purpose to bring California back just in time for the Olympics. And of course, by 2028, the rabbis have also said that their redemption will draw near, by 2027, I think. And so everything is calculated with this third temple, peace in the Middle East. It's going to be very interesting to watch the next 4 years. That's for sure. I expect major propaganda at the Olympics in 2028. If you remember, the Olympics were created by a Catholic who was Jesuit trained. He was probably a Jesuit. As an ecumenical tool to bring the world into one common mindset, the Roman games, the Roman mentality of ecumenism and brotherhood. And of course, the Olympics will be held in the United States. 2028, Trump is in office. 4 years from now, you do the math. I expect there to be a lot of resurrection of religion by that point in time. America will be very conservative, very religious. Catholicism will be back in some shape or form. There'll probably be a new pope by then for sure. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that particular Olympics. Remember, the beast itself is too obvious. So it always needs proxies to do its bidding. Rome can't show her teeth and start taking over people directly in the name of Catholicism. It has to use proxies. You know, the Jews are proxies for evil, the communists, the liberals, the secret societies, mafia, cartels, various agents, Knights of Columbus, people in different, Protestants that are actually Jesuits, so on and so forth. America is a proxy as a power for the false light of the Antichrist power, which is Rome. And everything points back to Rome. That's the goal, is get the world infiltrated, get all of these echo chambers to unite into one giant echo chamber and point back to Rome, and then Rome can enter the light and say, here I am. This is the point. So Rome has created an echo chamber throughout the world, and of course through these infiltrations, what the Bible tells you is that echo chamber will be complete very soon, very soon. Now, let's talk about Satan's government. This is the last thing I want to show you, and it's basically a graphic that I made that you can use for yourself as well. It's not an exhaustive graphic. It's not one of these graphics that tells you the relationship between every secret society and every single evil thing on earth. It's really more a conceptual graphic. So I want to look at it. I want to go over the structure of Satan's government in concept so that you can put all of the things we've looked at together. The Bible says that Satan gave his throne and power and great authority to the papal institution. That means that everything works around the papal throne, outward. Therefore, we can look at how the Roman Catholic Church is organized and understand the structure of Satan's government on earth. And of course, with everything we've covered up to that point, now you have context to when you look at this graphic, which I'll show you in just a second, you'll understand it. Satan's government has a visible structure, but this is the exoteric meaning for the masses. They tell them that we're a church, we're about God, and so on and so forth, but actually it has an internal structure, an esoteric and invisible structure, which is for the initiated. The Roman Catholic Church has to look like a church, like it's doing things for the people, like it's doing all this good in the world, when actually the Roman Catholic Church is an empire with a God king. It's the final iteration of the Babylonian system, hidden in plain sight. Therefore, it has to have an exoteric meaning and an esoteric meaning. So that's why this is called the Synagogue of Satan. Now, if we look at this graphic, again, I'll put this in the resources of this presentation, and you have basically the triangle pyramid of the Roman Catholic Church, which tells you the Pope is on top. You have the cardinals, archbishops, bishops, and the priests and laity. Now, there's different ways that these different layers are connected to the invisible Synagogue of Satan, right? So the external government is this. It's this pyramid, and you can look this up anywhere. I happen to make this because I like the font being a little more red and so on. Looks evil, so it gets the point across. But either way, so this structure is very common. You can find it. Just type in Catholic Church hierarchy. This is the exoteric structure of the government of the devil. However, the esoteric, which is around and throughout the web that spirals out from this government, is the true government of Satan. And of course, it's a top-down government. Satan is at the top, advising these papal families like the Borgia, the Farnese, the Orsini, Medici, all of these people, all the Brandini, all these people who are neck deep in the devil's soup with their occult mansions and, hunting grounds and all the things that they do that you probably know of. If you don't know of, then I'm not going to speak about them here because they're very heinous. Nevertheless, these people are serving the devil. Those people determine who becomes pope. The papal institution is filled by people from these various bloodlines. The Pope himself is also, after 1814, the Pope and the Jesuits are like two heads of the same snake. The Jesuits, if you've read The Art of War, do the Pope's bidding, but only when it's convenient to the agenda. So they have this schizophrenic relationship with the Jesuits, whereas the Jesuit general, especially now the Pope is a Jesuit, so the Jesuits are controlling the papal institution. But again, don't get lost in who is it the papal families, is the Jesuits. The point is the Pope is the visible expression of Satan in the world. He's the opposite of what he's telling you he is, which is the vicar of God. The Jesuits themselves control secret societies through various means, and those control politics, government, media, business, and so on. Remember, this when people look and say, it's the Jews, Oh, it's the Jews. And they look at politics and government and media and business. It's the Jews. Look at all the Jews in media. Look at all the Jews in pharmaceuticals and government and so on. Yes, you're looking at this layer. Do you get it? There are many layers. Behind this layer, all these people are secret society members. Who controls the secret society? It's the Jesuits. Because they are the ones that use the most black magic in history, and they're the ones who Satan has chosen to be his vehicle. So out of all of these evil things, they're going to fall in line to their masters. So don't look here and blame the people here. You have to keep looking up the chain. Now, beneath the Pope, you have cardinals. And again, if you're listening to this, you can download this in the resources section of this particular document. Just go to the library and you'll find it. But either way, here's the cardinals below the Pope. Now, if you remember, there are many Catholic orders like Knights of Columbus, Sovereign Military Order of the Knights of Malta, and so on. All of these Catholic orders have lay people in them, but these Catholic orders have a patron, which is a cardinal. And these patrons change throughout time, but these cardinals, who can sometimes be Jesuits, and then they would be pledging their allegiance to the Jesuit general, nevertheless, the cardinals are in charge of these various Catholic orders. And they're all reporting to them, and the cardinals report to the Pope, and so on and so forth. If a cardinal is a Jesuit cardinal, then he reports to the Jesuit general. So that's what I said. You can spend a lot of time arguing about who controls what, but you have to understand the main thing. The main thing is that there is an exoteric, i.e. external look at this church with its Pope and its hierarchy. Oh, they're all doing all these religious things, and an esoteric or hidden element to this government. Synagogue of Satan. Now, below these Catholic orders, also, again, you have politics, government, media, business. When people look and say, look, it's the Jews, or look, it's these various people, you have to go higher and see, okay, Knights of Columbus, Sovereign Military Order of Malta, Knights of whatever. There's so many different orders, and all of these orders are submissive to the cardinals above them. Below the cardinals, you have archbishops, which we looked at so many of these various things in the articles we read where these archbishops is a political entity. Like Vigano was the archbishop, I forget of something, but he was the papal nuncio to America. Papal nuncio is a political entity that has political immunity, can be extradited to a sovereign military state, a sovereign state, which is the Vatican. So he can be extradited in case there's a political intrigue and he has to go to court so that he won't testify. There's a political power to these archbishops. They are political entities. And the archbishops liaison with cardinals, with people in politics and media and government. So they do their part. They have their own diocese that they're basically in charge of. Bishops, same thing. And of course, the priests and laity are all part of it one way or another. You have confessional booths, intelligence gathering, recruiting, social and secular orders like Kiwanis, Rotary Club. All these people are either Knights of Military Malta or Freemasons or whatever else. They're all part of the club. And they start these organizations like Kiwanis and Rotary to recruit other people. Yale University, schools, media, business. These are the low-level institutions of society that are infiltrated and governed by priests like Jesuit priests, laity in various orders, and so on. People who are loyal to the Catholic Church, like you saw in all of the articles that we read. So this is Satan's government, folks. Again, you can download this and you use it. Do not be dogmatic about this and say, oh, well, it's actually the Freemasons are here. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The general structure is this. This is the general structure. What you need to know is that there is an exoteric and an esoteric government. Synagogue of Satan. A synagogue is an institution that's supposed to be about God, i.e., the visible triangle, where in actuality it serves Satan, the invisible hand behind all of these things and webs and intrigues. That is what you need to understand. Remember how we got the hierarchy of, how we read about the hierarchy of bishops and archbishops and cardinals all reporting to their various higher-ups and keeping tabs on people and governments and organizations. A good book was Perverting the Promised Land by Charles Wilcox. All of the various articles we read on the Jesuits' involvement in revolutions in Latin America. The S-Mom article where the cardinal was elected as the benefactor of the order, that was on Wikipedia. All the things by Bill Hughes and so on and so forth. Knights and generals are military titles, folks. These are defenders of a territory, specifically of a kingdom. A knight is a defender of a kingdom. That's why I said, when that book about the Rothschilds, about themselves, they said is Knights of the Rose, was it Red Shield? Yeah, it was Knights of the Red Shield. There are no such thing as Jewish knights, folks. Jews never had knights. Knights is a papal term that defends a papal kingdom. So when you have Knights of the Templars, or Knights of the Holy Order of whatever, or Knights of whatever else, Knights of Malta, these are defenders of a kingdom because the papal power is a kingdom. This is a kingdom. This is Satan's kingdom on earth. And that kingdom is not coming to an end by you, by voting, by Trump, by anything else. It's coming to an end when Jesus returns and displays his sovereignty over all things. So we have to hope and pray that that day will be hastened as much as possible. Obviously, everything is an appointed time, but nevertheless, the Roman Catholic Church is a kingdom. It's the fifth power in a sequence of kingdoms, but it's part of all of these old ideals. It's the same kingdom being manifested to you in a different package. It's the same kingdom as Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, being manifested to you in a different package, because Satan has to get rid of paganism, at least on the surface, and package it in something that seems that it is good and it is of God. The visible aspect of Satan's government is the Catholic Church. The invisible aspect is how all of these layers in the Catholic Church relate to secret societies, government, media, business, and so on, medicine, every institution that exists, how it ties into that visible government. And of course, all that visible government is centered around the Pope. Laity are involved in orders. Priests are Jesuit agents. Bishops and cardinals and archbishops are political entities with political domains and political responsibilities. The Vatican also is a sovereign state, just the same with the Knights of Malta. These are sovereign city-states, meaning nobody can tell them what to do, which also means that they have the ability to grant political immunity to their subjects because of extradition agreements. They can pull people out any time of any country and prevent them from being, persecuted or basically having to testify or anything else. They have full political power. A lot of top billionaires, like Peter Thiel, gets Maltese citizenship to be in the club. Archbishops can be papal nuncios, like I said with Vigano, which again is a political entity which has immunity. They can be extradited. All these secret societies, mafia, cartels, non-governmental organizations, and educational institutions, they're all connected to the papal throne one way or another through these various means. It's a very wide and complicated web. That's why I said it doesn't matter that you know every single relationship in this web. What matters is that you see that it all comes back to what the Bible says. Again, it doesn't matter who pulls the strings. Is it the papal families? Is it the Jesuit general? Ultimately, folks, Satan is pulling the strings. You know that. Satan is pulling the strings. Most people think the Roman Catholic Church is just a church. It's just a church. It's just an institution. And it's getting persecuted by all these atheistic governments. But the Roman Catholic Church is an empire. It is the fifth empire, the fifth and final empire. You have to get this. It's the culmination of thousands of years of satanic activity and is hidden in plain sight. It is the center of the Synagogue of Satan. So, now that we have reviewed some very important history on practically every major front, it's time to apply what we've learned toward current events. We know who the beast is, we know what the mark of the beast is, we know what the false prophet is, and we know what the image of the beast is. Now we can examine current events and practice our discernment with what we've learned. The last part of this is to see everything that we've talked about playing out before our eyes in the common era. So onward to part 7, Venerable Day of the Sun.